Hi guys. Tonight we begin a journey far below the surface, into cold, shadowed chambers where the air feels heavy with age and silence. You step carefully, feeling the uneven stone beneath your feet, damp and slick with moisture that has seeped through the earth over thousands of years. The flicker of your torch casts long, trembling shadows on the walls, revealing rough-hewn marks and natural fissures that hint at lives once lived in these hidden spaces. Outside, the wind moves across fog-covered hills, carrying with it the chill of Ice Age nights. Yet here underground the air is strangely still, a quiet reservoir of ancient cold that seems to hold secrets in every corner. The faint echo of dripping water resonates like a slow heartbeat, each drop marking the passage of centuries. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, comment below with your location and what time it is where you are, so we can feel connected across distance, together descending into this ancient mystery. You notice the narrow entrance ahead, almost hidden behind a tangle of frost-coated shrubs. Historical records suggest that early humans often concealed their shelters, choosing places that offered both security and natural insulation from the harsh winds above. Some researchers propose that these entrances were deliberately camouflaged with rocks or earth, a simple measure against predators and rival groups. You pause, considering the layers of survival instinct embedded in every step that led your predecessors here. The path slopes gently downward, the rock walls gradually enclosing, and a faint earthy scent rises with each inhalation, reminding you that the ground itself has preserved centuries of life and decay. As you continue, the torchlight reveals shallow carvings in the stone. At first, they appear random, almost accidental, but as your eyes adjust, patterns emerge: parallel lines, small notches, and abstract forms that may have served as markers or messages. Archaeologists remain divided on their meaning. Some suggest they were mnemonic devices, helping humans remember routes, water sources, or safe spots within a labyrinth of tunnels. Others argue they were symbolic, perhaps linked to spiritual beliefs or rites conducted away from the harsh light of the outside world. You trace one with your fingertips, feeling the worn smoothness where countless hands may have pressed centuries before. The ground shifts slightly, the stone beneath your feet colder and damp, evidence of underground streams that once nourished both humans and animals in these frozen landscapes. Some scholars suggest that proximity to water was the determining factor in selecting a cave for long-term habitation, while others note that safety from predators and exposure to storms may have been equally crucial. You pause to listen, hearing a distant echo that seems almost deliberate, as if the cave itself is breathing, a subtle reminder that the underground world has its own rhythms, separate from the daylight above. You notice faint traces of charcoal embedded in cracks along the walls. Early humans had learned to harness fire even in these enclosed, fragile environments, carefully controlling it to provide warmth and light without overwhelming the oxygen supply. Researchers continue to question how these fires were maintained for weeks or months at a time, especially during prolonged Ice Age winters. Some suggest that small, carefully tended hearths provided both practical survival benefits and social cohesion, allowing communities to gather and share knowledge, stories, and strategies. You imagine sitting near one of these tiny flames, the soft glow reflecting in the eyes of those around you, faces drawn and focused in the half-light of necessity and fear. The walls here are rough, occasionally damp with condensation that catches the torchlight in subtle gleams. The air carries the scent of mineral-rich stone, mixed faintly with ancient smoke and the lingering aroma of preserved foodstuffs that once rested in hidden crevices. You notice how these natural spaces seem both protective and confining, offering shelter while imposing a subtle psychological weight. Historians still debate whether the choice to live underground was purely survival-driven or influenced by deeper fears, a desire to retreat from unknown threats above ground. Some evidence hints at a mix of both, as communities adapted to the environment while also responding to instincts that predate recorded history. Deeper into the chamber, the ceiling lowers, forcing you to bend slightly, your torch scraping against uneven rock. You can almost hear the footsteps of the humans who came here long ago, their movements deliberate and cautious. Traces of their passage remain small depressions in soft stone, tiny scratches from tools, perhaps even the occasional bone fragment, preserved by the constant cool and dryness. Archaeologists have found similar signs in caves across Britain, from coastal shelters to inland grottos. Yet each site offers new questions, as patterns differ and the reasons behind their selection remain partially obscure. You realise that for every artefact uncovered, countless more remain hidden, buried beneath centuries of sediment and silence. You walk toward a narrow corridor branching from the main chamber. The space is barely wide enough for a single person. Walls slick with moisture, the air colder here than moments ago. You sense the human impulse to explore, to find new chambers that might hold additional warmth, water, or protection. Some scholars suggest that these smaller tunnels functioned as observation points, allowing inhabitants to monitor the entrance from a concealed vantage. Others argue that they may have been symbolic, connecting different areas in ways not immediately obvious to modern eyes. You feel the weight of centuries pressing gently, an almost imperceptible reminder that you are tracing the same paths as those who once fled to darkness for survival. The flickering torchlight catches faint outlines along the walls, depressions that could be storage niches or simply natural erosion. Their purpose remains uncertain. Some researchers speculate that small objects, perhaps food or tools, were placed here for easy access while remaining out of reach of predators. Others suggest the recesses were ritualistic, part of a system of marking and remembering the space itself. You step slowly, aware that even a single misstep could disturb fragile traces of the past. The chamber feels alive with memory, though silent, each stone holding whispers of survival, fear, and adaptation that humans have left behind. Now dim the lights, and allow yourself to sink further into this world of cold stone, ancient smoke, and quiet curiosity. The journey has only begun, but already you can feel the rhythm of the underground echo in your own heartbeat, a steady, subtle guide into the mysteries that lie ahead. You emerge from the faint glow of the chamber and find yourself at the edge of a world entirely reshaped by ice. The landscape outside the cave is unrecognizable to anyone from warmer times. Snow stretches in jagged sheets across the hills, frozen rivers gleaming under pale, filtered sunlight that struggles through a thick, grey sky. The wind moves over the barren land with a persistent whisper, carrying particles of ice that sting your skin and fill your ears with a soft, persistent hiss. This was Ice Age Britain, a place where survival demanded more than mere ingenuity. It demanded constant awareness of danger, shelter, and sustenance. You notice how the trees are skeletal, their bare branches frozen stiff, their roots barely clinging to frozen soil. Some researchers suggest that the harsh climate drove entire groups underground, abandoning open shelters to evade storms and the relentless cold. Others point to the subtle ways humans adapted above ground, creating windbreaks, layering hides, and even cultivating primitive fire pits in protected hollows. You walk slowly across the uneven terrain, boots crunching against frost-hardened soil, and you pause to study the patterns of the ice. Glacial flows and frozen ponds suggest that this was a land in constant change, where rivers could vanish beneath sheets of ice, only to re-emerge months later. Archaeologists still debate whether early humans moved in small nomadic groups or formed larger bands that travelled together for protection. Evidence from skeletal remains and tool caches indicates both strategies were likely employed, each suited to specific regions and environmental pressures. As you step carefully across a shallow ridge, you notice depressions that could be footprints, preserved in hardened mud and ice. Were these left by humans, or perhaps by wolves, reindeer, or other animals that shared this frozen landscape? The question lingers, unanswered, yet it sharpens your attention to every subtle detail in the world around you. The wind shifts, carrying with it a faint scent of earth and decay, and you realize how even the smallest sensory clues would have been vital for survival. Early humans would have used smell, sound, and touch in ways modern people rarely consider, detecting predators, locating water, and judging the safety of terrain. Some scholars suggest that the heightened awareness required in this environment fostered intricate social cooperation, a reliance on communication that extended beyond speech to subtle gestures, shared glances, and the careful passing of knowledge across generations. You imagine a small band huddled near a rocky outcrop, sharing warmth and planning their movements, each person acutely aware of the dangers that lie both above and below the surface. As you move along a ridge, the remnants of ancient flora catch your eye: stunted shrubs, frost-twisted roots, and mosses cling stubbornly to life in crevices where sunlight occasionally touches. Paleoecologists continue to study pollen and plant remains from these regions, reconstructing a picture of Ice Age Britain that is both stark and fragile. Evidence suggests that humans not only adapted to the environment, but also exploited microhabitats, gathering edible roots, small game, and other resources that could sustain them for weeks. You notice the subtle layering of sediment in a nearby hollow, a small geological record of snowfalls, thaw cycles, and even minor floods that would have influenced migration and shelter choices. You begin to sense the silence that dominates the landscape, punctuated only by occasional groans of shifting ice or the distant call of a bird adapted to this frozen world. Historians still debate whether the pervasive quiet contributed to psychological stress among early humans, or whether it encouraged a form of meditative vigilance, a heightened attentiveness to the subtle movements of the world. Some scholars suggest that the isolation, combined with the stark beauty of the landscape, shaped early human cognition and perhaps even the earliest forms of symbolic thought. You feel that tension yourself, a quiet awareness of both your own vulnerability and the ancient presence embedded in every hill and hollow. The terrain becomes more rugged as you approach a series of cliffs and deep fissures, natural formations that would later serve as entrances to subterranean shelters. The shadows here are long and deceptive, giving the impression of hidden tunnels where none may exist. Yet archaeological surveys show that these areas were favoured by prehistoric humans for their strategic advantages: access to water from melting ice, protection from storms, and the ability to observe surrounding lands without being easily seen would have made these cliffs invaluable. You pause, imagining a small group stationed at one of these ledges, scanning the horizon for movement, ready to retreat into hidden passages at the first sign of danger. The cold bites deeper as you continue, and you notice traces of animal life in the snow. Tracks converge and diverge, sometimes human, sometimes not, telling stories that no one could read in full but which shaped every decision of early humans. Did these tracks signal potential prey, or the approach of predators? The evidence is fragmentary, yet every trace contributed to the survival strategies that guided humans underground. you realize that the land itself, with its frozen expanses, cliffs, and fissures, acted as both obstacle and ally, dictating movement, habitation, and even social organization. You step onto a plateau and gaze across the icy expanse, noting subtle depressions that might indicate seasonal camps or temporary shelters. Some archaeologists propose that these were carefully selected spots for overwintering, offering minimal exposure to elements while maintaining access to hunting grounds. Others argue that the evidence is inconclusive, that these depressions may result from natural processes rather than human activity. Yet even the ambiguity contributes to the quiet mystery of the Ice Age, reminding you that so much of this ancient world remains unseen, preserved in the ice, soil, and stone, waiting to be interpreted. As the wind carries distant hollow echoes across the plateau, you imagine the journey of early humans moving from open land to subterranean refuge. Every step would have been deliberate, every choice critical, each decision a matter of life or death. You sense that the underground spaces you glimpsed earlier were not merely shelters, but deliberate adaptations to an unforgiving climate. These choices, small and monumental at the same time, offer a window into human resilience, ingenuity, and the enduring drive to survive in a world that demanded constant vigilance. You pause, feeling the rhythm of the frozen landscape, the subtle pressures of wind, ice, and terrain, and the lingering impression of those who came before. Their presence is faint yet persistent, encoded in every ridge, fissure, and hollow, a quiet testament to human survival under conditions that would challenge even the most prepared among us. As you breathe in the cold air, you sense that each discovery, each footprint, each artifact is part of a larger story that remains largely hidden beneath the surface, a narrative that you have only just begun to touch. You descend toward a shallow hollow at the base of the ridge, the air growing cooler and denser with each step. The ground beneath you is uneven, frozen soil interspersed with patches of ice that glint faintly in the dim light of your torch. You notice how early humans would have relied on similar careful observation, testing each step before committing their full weight, understanding that one misjudged foothold could lead to injury or separation from the group. Archaeological studies suggest that such terrain influenced the development of balance, agility, and group coordination, subtle adaptations honed over generations. You pause to listen, the faint crunch of frost under your boots echoing softly, mingling with distant dripping water that reverberates through unseen hollows. You catch sight of a shallow overhang, a natural niche where a small group might have sheltered during sudden storms. Evidence from Ice Age sites across Britain shows that humans often selected these semi-enclosed spaces for temporary habitation, combining protection from wind with visibility of surrounding terrain. Researchers remain divided on whether these overhangs were merely convenient or whether they held deeper strategic significance, perhaps functioning as early observation posts for hunting or predator detection. You step closer, running your hand along the cold, rough stone, feeling the grooves and striations left by centuries of water flow and geological movement. These textures would have been familiar to humans who relied on touch as much as sight to navigate their environment. Food scarcity was a constant concern. You imagine early humans carrying small caches of dried meat, roots, and tubers into sheltered hollows, carefully rationing supplies to endure weeks or months of limited resources. Archaeological evidence supports this, with traces of animal bones, burnt seeds, and charred plant matter found in similar locations. Some scholars suggest that food storage was not just practical, but also social, a system that reinforced communal bonds and hierarchical structures within small bands. You visualize a group clustered around a small hearth, the faint glow illuminating faces tense with vigilance yet softened by the shared act of survival. The landscape around the hollow reveals subtle depressions that could be primitive traps or storage pits. You notice how these would have provided both sustenance and protection, concealing food from scavenging animals and preserving it from exposure. Historians still debate the extent to which early humans engineered these features or relied on natural formations, but the consistency across multiple sites suggests intentional design. You crouch and run your fingers along a small indentation in the frost-hardened soil, imagining the hands that shaped it, hands both delicate and determined, balancing urgency with careful foresight. As you move deeper into the hollow, the wind from above fades, replaced by the muffled silence that precedes descent into more permanent shelters. You feel the temperature drop subtly, a reminder that the subterranean world preserves its own microclimates. Some researchers suggest that early humans understood these variations intuitively, selecting sleeping areas based on warmth, humidity, and airflow. Others note that the evidence is inconclusive, that chance may have played as large a role as foresight. You inhale the damp, earthy scent, imagining the smell of smoke, moss, and stored food blending in the low ceilings of caves that would become long-term refuges. You notice faint scratches on a nearby rock face, shallow but deliberate, running in patterns that suggest repeated attention. Some scholars suggest these were markers, used to navigate complex underground networks or indicate water sources and exits. Others propose a more symbolic function, perhaps connected to early rituals, a way of recording presence, memory, or events. Archaeologists have found similar markings in caves across Europe, their purpose unresolved yet clearly intentional. You trace the scratches with your fingertips, feeling the subtle ridges beneath your touch, imagining the countless hands that left them over millennia. Small pools of melted ice glimmer in the low light, evidence of slow ongoing geological processes. Early humans would have used these as water sources, careful to avoid contamination and conserve what little they could gather. Scholars continue to debate whether water management was deliberate or opportunistic, but the repeated presence of such pools in habitation sites suggests a deep understanding of the underground environment. You lean closer, noticing tiny ripple marks, signs of wind, small creatures, or subtle shifts in temperature, each detail a clue in the ancient landscape's ongoing story. You feel a subtle shift in the air as you approach a narrow passage leading deeper underground. The chamber beyond seems to beckon, shadows merging and shifting with your torchlight. Archaeological studies reveal that some Ice Age humans constructed secondary tunnels, extending natural caves into labyrinthine networks. The purpose of these expansions remains uncertain. Some suggest they were purely functional, connecting separate chambers for water, food storage, or sleeping areas. Others propose ritual or symbolic significance, a spatial narrative encoded in stone. You take a careful step forward, feeling the subtle incline beneath your feet, your senses heightened in the quiet darkness. The faint echo of dripping water grows more pronounced as you move further in, each drop a soft metronome marking the passage of time in this subterranean realm. You sense that these spaces were more than mere shelters. They were environments that shaped human behavior, cognition, and social interaction. The combination of low light, echoing chambers, and confined spaces may have fostered forms of communication, ritual, and observation that left no written record yet influenced survival strategies. You pause to consider how profoundly these underground habits affected human evolution, intuition, and perception of danger. You notice a cluster of rocks arranged in a way that suggests human intervention. Some archaeologists believe these were rudimentary hearths, others that they marked territorial boundaries or provided support for temporary platforms. The evidence is subtle, inconclusive, yet undeniable in its presence. You crouch to examine the stones, feeling their cold surfaces, and imagine the care taken by hands long gone, balancing the need for warmth, stability, and safety in an environment where misjudgment could be fatal. The echoes of their decisions linger, quiet yet insistent, inviting you to consider how humans endured, adapted, and thrived in conditions that modern imagination struggles to replicate. You step back into the main hollow, the tunnel narrowing behind you, the outside world a distant memory, the patterns of human habitation, the careful selection of shelter, the strategic use of natural and constructed features, all converge into a tableau of survival and ingenuity. Scholars remain divided on the relative weight of environmental pressure versus instinct, social cohesion versus individual decision-making, yet the physical evidence points to a remarkable adaptability. You take a deep breath, the cold air filling your lungs, and sense the quiet persistence of life, innovation, and endurance embedded in every stone, every hollow, every trace of human presence that remains. You step carefully into a low tunnel, the walls narrowing as the faint torchlight flickers across damp stone. The air carries a subtle chill, scented faintly of mineral and moisture, and every inhalation reminds you that you are tracing the path of humans who once relied entirely on their senses to survive here. Archaeological records show that early Britons often expanded natural caves into networks of interlinked chambers, creating spaces that could accommodate families or small groups for extended periods. The tunnels twist and turn unpredictably, revealing small alcoves and hidden niches that may have functioned as sleeping areas or storage for essential supplies. You pause to touch the stone, feeling the smoothness worn by countless hands and the rough patches left by natural erosion. Interestingly, small carvings appear on the walls, subtle yet deliberate. Some resemble lines and dots, while others suggest abstract symbols whose meaning is lost to time. Researchers continue to debate whether these markings serve practical purposes such as navigation or water source indicators, or whether they held a more symbolic or ritual significance. You trace the grooves with your fingertips, imagining that these faint imprints once guided humans through darkness, providing both safety and continuity in a world of unpredictable danger. As you continue, the tunnel slopes gently downward, leading toward a larger chamber. The sound of dripping water grows louder, creating a quiet rhythm that fills the space with a steady, hypnotic presence. Certain studies indicate that proximity to underground water was a key factor in choosing habitation sites, offering both a reliable supply and a degree of environmental stability. You notice how the chamber opens slightly, revealing patches of stone that catch the torchlight, showing subtle signs of repeated human activity. Some experts believe these areas were used for communal gatherings, where firelight, conversation, and shared tasks fostered social cohesion during long winters. The ground beneath your feet shows faint depressions, some filled with sediment, others maintaining their shape as if waiting to be discovered. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans carefully leveled or reinforced sleeping areas to protect against dampness and cold. You crouch to examine a small hollow where traces of charcoal remain embedded in the stone, perhaps marking an ancient hearth. Many researchers suggest that maintaining fire underground required skill and careful ventilation, balancing warmth with the dangers of smoke and oxygen depletion. You can almost hear the quiet discussions, the murmured instructions, and the measured movements of those who relied on fire as both a lifeline and a communal anchor. Observations hint at more than practical concerns. Some of the deeper chambers contain small clusters of animal bones, carefully arranged and partially charred. It remains unclear if these were remnants of meals, ritual offerings, or markers for territory within the cave. The arrangement is too deliberate to be entirely accidental, yet its purpose escapes certainty. You notice how these subtle traces transform the environment from mere shelter into a layered narrative of survival, memory, and human ingenuity, each stone and bone carrying echoes of past decisions. You step into a narrower passage connecting to another chamber. The air grows cooler, heavier, tinged with the faint scent of mineral-rich water that has seeped through centuries of a rock. Certain studies indicate that these passages may have been used to regulate airflow, keeping living areas warmer or drier while allowing smoke from fires to dissipate. Some researchers propose that the architecture, though seemingly primitive, reflects a sophisticated understanding of natural ventilation and human comfort in otherwise harsh conditions. You brush your hand along the wall, feeling faint scratches and shallow grooves that may have guided hands through darkness or marked safe routes. Interestingly, there are areas where the stone appears deliberately shaped, forming low benches or steps carved from the bedrock itself. Archaeological records show similar modifications in caves across northern Europe, often attributed to practical purposes such as seating, storage, or sleeping platforms. Yet some interpretations suggest symbolic intent, perhaps marking communal spaces or reinforcing social hierarchies within small groups. You imagine a quiet scene, families or bands huddled on stone ledges, fires flickering, children watching, elders sharing knowledge, all within the protective envelope of stone and darkness. You notice small indentations in the ceiling above, almost imperceptible, like tiny hollows that may have held tools, food, or other items out of reach. Some experts believe these features indicate a deliberate use of vertical space in underground living areas, a method to maximize limited resources while maintaining safety. Others argue they were accidental, the product of erosion or minor collapses over centuries. Either way, the effect is clear. Early humans demonstrated remarkable adaptability, blending the natural environment with purposeful modifications to create functional, sustainable living spaces. The faint echoes of dripping water shift as you move further, and you begin to hear other subtle sounds, perhaps the settling of stone, or the movement of air through distant tunnels. Observations hint that these acoustic properties may have influenced how humans arranged their spaces, using sound as a guide through labyrinthine passages. You sense a quiet intelligence embedded in the architecture, a careful attention to sensory details that would have been critical in a world without artificial light or modern navigation aids. You pause in a small chamber that opens onto multiple narrow corridors, each leading deeper into the labyrinth. The shadows seem to shift independently of the torchlight, revealing faint outlines of rough-hewn niches and low platforms. Archaeological records show that some of these branching passages were used for storage, others possibly as emergency escape routes or observation points. It remains uncertain whether all tunnels were planned or if some grew organically over generations, but the cumulative effect is undeniable, a complex underground network that reflects both survival, necessity, and human ingenuity. You step carefully into a wider chamber, the stone walls damp and cool beneath your fingertips, and the faint glow of your torch reveals the subtle textures of centuries-old surfaces. The air carries a quiet, persistent chill, mingled with a faint earthy scent, hinting at water seeping slowly through the rock above. Archaeological records show that early humans often constructed hearths in such chambers, small fires tended with care to provide warmth, light, and a sense of communal security. You imagine a group huddled around a low flame, the soft orange glow reflecting on anxious faces, the flicker casting shadows that danced across stone surfaces. marking out space and safety in the deep darkness. Some researchers propose that fire served not only practical needs but also social ones. It may have acted as a focal point, a space where knowledge, stories, and instructions for survival were exchanged. You notice faint layers of soot on the ceiling and walls, suggesting fires were maintained for extended periods. Interestingly, the placement and size of these hearths reveal strategic thought vents, airflow, and the proximity to sleeping areas were all considered, even in a time without formal architectural training. You crouch near one such site, running your fingers along the cool stones, sensing the care required to maintain warmth without overwhelming the enclosed space. The chamber contains small depressions in the floor, some partially filled with sediment. Archaeologists have found similar features in Ice Age sites across Britain, often interpreted as rudimentary storage pits for dried meat, roots, or small game. It remains unclear whether all depressions served functional purposes or if some were used symbolically, perhaps marking personal spaces or family units within the group. You step lightly across the floor, conscious of each indentation, imagining the hands that once dug, filled, and arranged these small hollows in service of survival. The flickering torchlight illuminates faint markings on the wall's parallel lines, circular impressions, and shallow scratches that may have been intentional. Observations hint that these could have served multiple purposes: navigation cues within a complex tunnel network, territorial markers, or even primitive mnemonic devices. Some researchers suggest they may have conveyed information about water sources, predator activity, or seasonal changes, while others propose a symbolic or ritual function that remains elusive. You run your hand along a sequence of lines, sensing the connection across generations that left these subtle traces in stone. You notice small ledges carved or naturally formed along one side of the chamber. Evidence suggests that these may have been used as sleeping areas, keeping inhabitants slightly elevated from the damp floor. Archaeological studies indicate that proximity to fire and the strategic arrangement of ledges contributed to both warmth and social organization, with families or small bands positioning themselves according to group dynamics. Interestingly, the positioning of certain ledges and hearths appears consistent across multiple Ice Age sites, suggesting a shared understanding of effective underground living strategies. The sound of water dripping echoes faintly through the chamber, creating a rhythmic pattern that both soothes and alerts. Certain studies indicate that early humans may have paid attention to these natural acoustics, using echoes to monitor movements within complex tunnels or to communicate across distances. You pause, listening closely, imagining the subtle exchanges of information that would have occurred in the quiet darkness gestures, whispers, and the careful transmission of knowledge critical for survival. Small animal bones lie scattered in a corner of the chamber, some charred and others unmarked. Archaeologists remain divided on their interpretation. Some suggest they are remnants of meals, while others propose ritual or symbolic significance. The arrangement is deliberate enough to indicate human intention, yet the precise meaning is lost to time. You lean closer, noting the careful placement and imagining the decisions behind each action: how to preserve food, how to prepare for the long cold, how to maintain order and cohesion in confined spaces. You move toward a narrow passage leading further into the underground network, the chamber behind you gradually receding into shadow. Observations hint that these smaller corridors were multifunctional. Some served as escape routes, others for storage, and still others for observation of entrances or external activity. Evidence suggests that the branching layout was not random, reflecting a combination of natural formation and deliberate modification. You feel the subtle guidance of the environment, each twist and turn directing movement in ways that remain partly mysterious even today. The walls along the passage display slight indentations, shallow niches that may have held small items or tools. Some researchers propose that these vertical spaces maximize the utility of limited underground areas, while others suggest symbolic purposes, perhaps marking status or roles within the group. You trace the surface, feeling the subtle depressions beneath your fingertips, and consider how humans of the Ice Age transformed natural shelters into living, functional environments. As you progress, the chamber opens into another space where evidence of hearth activity is particularly pronounced. Charred stones, ash layers, and traces of burnt plants indicate fires maintained for weeks at a time. Certain studies suggest that controlling fire in these underground chambers required intimate knowledge of airflow, wood types, and smoke management. You imagine the delicate balance required enough warmth to endure freezing nights, but not so much as to suffocate or reveal the location to predators. The quiet ingenuity embedded in these practices underscores the sophistication of early human survival strategies. You step cautiously through the narrow passage, the faint glow of your torch revealing a collection of small alcoves carved into the walls. Each alcove is shallow, yet deliberate, as if shaped to hold objects essential for survival tools, gathered plants, or perhaps caches of dried meat. Archaeological records show that early humans used such features to organize their living spaces, creating a sense of order within the constricted underground environment. You run your fingers over the cool stone, feeling the subtle grooves left by centuries of use and imagining the hands that once placed precious resources here. Balancing practicality with a careful awareness of scarcity. Interestingly, some of the alcoves contain traces of soot and charred remains, suggesting that fires were lit nearby, perhaps to dry food or heat stones. Certain studies indicate that underground cooking was a delicate practice, requiring skill to maintain warmth without overwhelming ventilation or creating hazardous smoke accumulation. You notice the way the chamber narrows and widens at intervals, and you imagine early humans moving deliberately, aware of the faint echoes, learning how sound could signal presence or warn of approaching danger. The environment itself acted as both shelter and teacher, shaping behavior in ways that modern observers are only beginning to appreciate. You come across a patch of floor where sediment has shifted, revealing fragments of animal bones and small tools made from flint and bone. Archaeologists continue to debate the purpose of these deposits. Were they left intentionally as offerings, or are they simply remnants of meals consumed in haste? Observations hint that some placements may have held symbolic value, perhaps marking individual contributions to communal survival, or commemorating a hunt. You crouch, examining a tiny flake of flint, imagining the care that went into its creation and use, the skill passed quietly from one generation to the next. The faint aroma of damp earth fills the chamber, mingling with traces of smoke and the lingering scent of preserved plants. Evidence suggests that early humans were remarkably attuned to such sensory cues, using smell to detect changes in air quality, the presence of predators, or the safety of stored food. Some researchers propose that this heightened sensory awareness influenced early social structures, encouraging cooperative behavior and careful monitoring of resources. You feel a quiet resonance with this instinct, sensing the subtle rhythms of life in the underground network. You move toward a corner where the wall curves slightly, revealing what appears to be a shallow hearth platform. Certain studies indicate that these platforms were used for both cooking and heating, and the positioning reflects a keen understanding of ventilation and fire management. Notably, some hearths are situated near water seepage points, suggesting an intuitive grasp of the environmental factors that would maintain both warmth and access to a vital resource. You imagine families gathered here, exchanging knowledge, tending fires, and preparing meals in careful rotation, each task performed with quiet precision. You notice faint scratches and lines on the wall above the hearth, shallow yet deliberate. Archaeological records show similar markings in caves across Britain, often interpreted as primitive notation systems, route markers, or symbolic gestures. It remains unclear if these carvings were intended for communication, ritual, or memory keeping. Yet their presence speaks to a human desire to impose structure on the underground world. You trace the patterns with your fingertips, considering how early humans recorded and interpreted their environment without written language. Relying on shared understanding and observation, small depressions in the stone floor suggest sleeping areas, positioned strategically around the hearth. Evidence indicates that maintaining warmth during cold nights was essential, and these arrangements allowed groups to conserve heat while maintaining access to cooking and communal areas. Some researchers propose that these sleeping clusters reinforced social bonds, with proximity reflecting kinship, hierarchy, or collaborative roles. You pause, imagining the quiet intimacy of a group huddled together, whispering, moving cautiously in the darkness. Each breath and movement calculated for survival. Interestingly, traces of small plants and seeds embedded in crevices suggest that underground storage extended beyond immediate food needs. Certain studies propose that early humans gathered and preserved edible plants for future use. Perhaps understanding seasonal cycles and the reliability of stored resources, you lean closer to examine the delicate remains, noticing their resilience even after thousands of years, and sense the foresight required to plan ahead in a world dictated by climate and scarcity. You continue down a corridor leading deeper into the underground complex, the ceiling lowering slightly, forcing you to bend and adjust your posture. Observations hint that the physical design of these spaces, whether natural or enhanced by human intervention, may have encouraged movement patterns that minimized energy expenditure and maximized safety. You feel a quiet admiration for the adaptability embedded in these spaces, where every choice, from chamber selection to hearth placement, reflects a careful balance between environment and human need. At the end of the passage, a wider chamber opens, revealing multiple alcoves, remnants of hearths, and traces of human occupation. Archaeological records show that such chambers often served as hubs of activity, combining living space, storage, and work areas in a single protected environment. Some researchers suggest that the complexity of these underground structures reflects not only survival ingenuity but also early social organization, a microcosm of collaboration and hierarchy under extreme conditions. You step into the space, aware of the faint echoes and subtle drafts, sensing that each stone and depression carries a story of resilience, adaptation, and quiet ingenuity from those who once called this subterranean world home. You step carefully into the next chamber, the air cooler and heavier, carrying a faint scent of damp stone and distant mineral-rich water. Evidence suggests that early humans selected such spaces not only for shelter, but also for their microclimates, which offered protection from frost and wind while maintaining a stable, livable environment. The walls glisten faintly, streaked with moisture, and you notice how natural indentations could have served as resting areas, hiding places for tools, or small storage niches. Your fingertips brush against the cold surface, tracing the subtle grooves left by centuries of water erosion and human interaction, each mark a reminder of the delicate balance between survival and environment. Intriguingly, small hearths are positioned near natural ledges, indicating careful placement to maximize warmth and visibility within the chamber. Archaeological studies indicate that maintaining fire underground required knowledge of airflow, wood type, and smoke management. You imagine a group clustered around these tiny flames, faces illuminated in flickering light, whispering instructions and passing skills essential for daily survival. Observations hint that the warmth and light provided by these fires were as much social anchors as practical tools, fostering cohesion among members of the band. You notice a series of shallow carvings along the wall, linear and circular in nature, some intersecting in complex patterns. Certain researchers propose that these markings were intended as navigation aids, guiding humans through the labyrinthine corridors, while others suggest a symbolic or ritualistic function. It remains uncertain whether the carvings conveyed specific information, represented shared experiences, or served as a combination of practical and symbolic purposes. You trace one pattern with your fingertips, imagining the quiet concentration of those who left it, carefully inscribing meaning in stone that survives only as faint impressions. Small pools of water glimmer in the corners of the chamber, fed by slow drips from the ceiling above. Some findings reveal that early humans may have used these natural reservoirs for drinking, food preparation, or even modest hygiene practices, while the proximity of water may have influenced the overall layout of habitation areas. Observations hint that groups were acutely aware of moisture patterns, balancing the benefits of water access with the risks of dampness and potential flooding. You lean closer, noting tiny ripple marks in the surface, perhaps from falling droplets or the movement of small animals. As you move further, you encounter clusters of animal bones, some charred, others relatively intact. Patterns suggest they may have been left intentionally, perhaps as remnants of meals, while other placements hint at ritual or symbolic arrangements. Experts remain divided on the exact purpose, but the deliberate nature of their placement indicates a thoughtful interaction with the surrounding environment. You crouch to examine one fragment, imagining the care and attention it represents, a record of sustenance, survival, and human ingenuity preserved in the cold stone. You step into a narrow tunnel branching from the chamber, the ceiling lowering slightly and forcing you to stoop. Certain researchers propose that these connecting passages were carefully planned to maximize space and maintain airflow while allowing access to multiple chambers. Other studies indicate that some tunnels may have grown naturally over time, expanded through repeated human activity and erosion. Observations hint that early humans understood the implications of spatial arrangement, creating pathways that balanced safety, efficiency, and environmental awareness. The walls of this tunnel bear faint indentations, small hollows that may have served as storage spaces for tools, gathered plants, or dried meat. Evidence suggests that vertical organization within confined spaces was a recurring feature of Ice Age subterranean life. Intriguingly, some of these niches appear in consistent positions across multiple sites, hinting at shared knowledge or cultural practices among different groups. You run your fingers along one of the depressions, sensing the human presence embedded in every curve and angle, a quiet testament to ingenuity in a challenging environment. The echo of dripping water grows louder as you proceed, mingling with the subtle sound of stone contracting and settling. Some findings reveal that the acoustic qualities of these spaces may have influenced how humans arranged sleeping areas, hearths, and passageways. Experts continue to debate the role of sound, suggesting it may have been a tool for early warning, communication, or simply a natural feature of habitation sites. You pause to listen, attuning your senses to the quiet resonance. Imagining early humans interpreting these subtle auditory cues as part of daily survival. A low platform rises slightly from the floor ahead, its surface smoothed as if by repeated use. Archaeological studies indicate that these areas may have served as sleeping spaces, work surfaces, or communal gathering points. Observations hint at careful planning, with proximity to hearths, water sources, and access points influencing layout. You imagine a small group moving deliberately across the chamber, each action informed by experience and necessity. maintaining a rhythm that balanced comfort, efficiency, and safety in an unforgiving environment. You pause at the edge of a wider chamber opening where shadows stretch into unexplored recesses. Patterns suggest multiple generations of modification, each layer of stone and sediment recording the passage of time, the movement of people, and the accumulation of knowledge. Some researchers propose that this complexity indicates a high degree of planning, while others argue that the labyrinthine nature arose organically through repeated use. Either way, the space feels alive with history. Every wall and alcove a silent storyteller of human adaptation, ingenuity, and resilience. You move cautiously into a narrower corridor, the torchlight trembling across slick stone walls, highlighting subtle grooves and indentations. Observation suggests that these passages were more than mere connectors between chambers. They may have served as controlled access points, allowing early humans to monitor movement and maintain security within the underground network. You notice faint scratches along the walls, shallow and deliberate, possibly left by tools or fingers tracing routes. Some researchers propose that these markings functioned as early navigation systems, guiding inhabitants through otherwise disorienting tunnels. Others argue that they might have held symbolic meaning, perhaps representing memory aids or warnings for future travellers. The air grows colder as you proceed, carrying a faint mineral scent mingled with traces of smoke and charred plant matter. Certain studies indicate that early humans were highly attentive to these environmental cues, using subtle shifts in temperature, humidity, and scent to make decisions about movement, fire placement, and sleeping arrangements. You pause to listen to the faint drip of water echoing from deeper recesses, imagining how such sounds might have served as both orientation signals and a constant reminder of the outside world pressing through the stone. Small depressions in the floor catch your attention, each irregular in shape but carefully placed. Archaeological records show that such features often contained essential supplies like dried meat, tubers, or small game. Interestingly, some researchers suggest that the arrangement of these storage pits may reflect social organization, with certain areas designated for specific individuals or family units. Observations hint that the careful use of vertical and horizontal space was critical to maximizing efficiency in a confined environment, turning natural formations into functional living quarters. As you advance, you notice traces of charred stones and ash embedded in natural depressions along the walls. Evidence suggests that early humans maintained multiple small fires in these chambers, balancing warmth and light while minimizing smoke accumulation. Some findings reveal that fire placement may have also influenced the acoustic properties of the space, creating zones where conversation, instruction, and alert signals could be transmitted quietly and effectively. You imagine families clustered near these hearths, their attention split between the flickering flames and the subtle movements of others in the darkness. You step carefully over a slight rise in the floor, noticing a pattern of shallow grooves along the stone. Certain researchers propose that these could be footprints preserved by sediment or repeated paths worn into the rock by generations of humans. Other studies suggest the possibility that they were intentionally created, serving as tactile guidance in low-light conditions or even as symbolic markers of territory within the underground network. You trace one groove with your fingers, feeling the cold stone and the lingering imprint of hands and feet that once navigated this complex labyrinth. The tunnel opens into a wider chamber, its ceiling lower in some areas and higher in others, forming natural alcoves and niches. Observations hint that these spaces were multifunctional, accommodating sleeping areas, workstations, and storage zones all within a single chamber. Archaeological records show that careful positioning relative to fire sources and airflow was critical, and experts remain divided on whether the layouts were fully planned or emerged organically over repeated use. You take a slow breath, sensing the subtle balance of safety, warmth, and accessibility that these early humans maintained. You notice faint scratches on the walls near the entrance of smaller side tunnels, irregular yet seemingly intentional. Some researchers propose these were mnemonic symbols, reminders of routes, water sources, or safe resting places deeper underground. Others suggest a ritual or symbolic purpose, perhaps marking significant events or experiences within the group. The exact intent remains uncertain, yet the presence of these subtle markings highlights a sophisticated awareness of environment, memory, and communal knowledge. A quiet draft moves through the chamber, stirring faintly at the edges of sediment and dust. Certain studies indicate that early humans understood these subtle air currents, using them to control smoke, cool sleeping areas, or detect incoming dangers. Observations hint at a level of environmental attunement that goes beyond simple survival, reflecting nuanced interaction with a subterranean world that demanded constant attention and adjustment. You pause, feeling the rhythm of the underground, a silent pulse that guided life and movement in ways both practical and instinctive. You notice faint indentations along the floor that suggest platforms for seating or sleeping. Archaeological records show that elevation, even by a few inches, could make a significant difference in warmth retention and comfort. Interestingly, similar features are found across multiple Ice Age sites, indicating shared knowledge or convergent solutions to the challenges of underground habitation. You imagine early humans arranging their limited space thoughtfully, balancing communal needs with individual safety, each choice informed by experience and necessity. The chamber extends further, shadows merging with the torchlight, revealing additional recesses and narrow passageways. Observations hint at a complex, interlinked network of spaces, each serving multiple functions and evolving over generations. Some researchers propose that the design reflects a deep understanding of both human behavior and environmental constraints, while others emphasize the role of trial, error, and adaptation over time. You move carefully, aware that every step echoes faintly, carrying the weight of countless footsteps that preceded you. A subtle chorus of survival and ingenuity in the frozen underground. You step into a wider chamber, the air cool and slightly damp, carrying the faint earthy scent of stone and ancient smoke. Observations hint that this space may have served as a central hub, where early humans gathered to cook, share resources, and plan their movements through the labyrinth of tunnels. You notice subtle depressions along the floor, arranged in patterns that suggest sleeping areas or workstations. Archaeological studies indicate that the placement of these depressions likely balanced warmth from nearby hearths with access to storage and exit routes, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of spatial organization. Interestingly, several small niches along the walls appear deliberately formed, their surfaces smooth and shallow. Some researchers propose these were used to hold tools, food, or personal belongings, keeping essential items within reach but safely off the floor. Other studies suggest a more symbolic function, perhaps serving as markers for family units or social hierarchy. You run your fingers along one niche, sensing the faint grooves that centuries of use have left behind, imagining the care and foresight required to adapt these natural formations into functional living spaces. Faint traces of ash and charred wood catch your eye near a slightly elevated ledge. Evidence suggests that early humans maintained small fires here to provide warmth and light, carefully balancing fuel consumption with ventilation needs. Some findings reveal that the placement of hearths may have also been influenced by acoustic considerations, creating areas where conversation and communication could occur without disturbing rest in other parts of the chamber. You crouch near the ledge, picturing families huddled around a modest flame, quietly observing the subtle rhythms of the underground environment. Small clusters of animal bones are scattered throughout the chamber, some charred, others intact. Observations hint that these may represent meals, ritual offerings, or markers of activity within specific areas. Archaeologists remain divided on the interpretation, noting that placement patterns vary across sites and contexts. You kneel to examine a bone fragment, noticing its delicate edges and imagining the hands that prepared it, the firelight illuminating a careful balance of necessity, skill, and survival strategy. The chamber slopes slightly downward toward a narrow corridor, the air growing cooler and heavier. Certain researchers propose that these connecting passages were intentionally designed to regulate airflow and maintain consistent temperatures within living areas. Others suggest that the paths expanded organically over time through repeated use and minor geological shifts. Observations hint that the arrangement of tunnels allowed for both practical movement and subtle social organization. As groups navigated together in coordinated patterns, you notice faint linear scratches along the walls, intersecting at odd angles. Archaeological records show that similar markings appear in other Ice Age sites, though their meaning remains elusive. Some experts propose they were navigational guides, helping inhabitants find their way through complex corridors. Others argue that they had symbolic significance, perhaps representing memory aids, events, or communal stories. You trace a line with your fingertips, feeling the subtle texture of the stone, and sense the presence of generations that interacted with this space carefully and deliberately. A small pool of water glimmers in a recessed area of the chamber, fed by slow drips from above. Evidence suggests that early humans relied on such sources for drinking and food preparation, while simultaneously being mindful of moisture-related hazards like damp bedding or mold. Some researchers propose that water availability influenced the overall layout of subterranean living spaces, with sleeping and cooking areas positioned to optimize access while maintaining safety. You lean closer to the pool, noticing minute ripple patterns that hint at dripping water, tiny creatures, or subtle air currents, each detail shaping the lived experience in the underground network. As you move toward another chamber branching off to the side, the ceiling lowers slightly, requiring careful navigation. Observations hint that changes in ceiling height may have been used intentionally or instinctively, creating microzones within the larger complex. Some studies suggest that these variations influenced where groups gathered, rested, or conducted tasks, subtly shaping daily routines. You run your hand along the rough stone, noting both natural erosion and marks of human intervention, a silent testament to the interaction between people and their environment. You notice faint depressions in the floor forming irregular patterns that could indicate sleeping clusters or temporary work areas. Archaeological studies indicate that even slight elevation or floor modifications could improve warmth retention and comfort. Interestingly, these features appear consistently across multiple Ice Age sites, suggesting shared strategies or convergent solutions for subterranean habitation. You imagine early humans arranging their limited space thoughtfully, prioritizing communal needs while conserving warmth and resources in a demanding environment. The chamber widens further, opening into additional tunnels and alcoves. Patterns suggest a multifunctional space, evolving over generations with each layer of sediment, fire residue, and carved niche recording human adaptation and ingenuity. Some researchers propose that the complexity reflects both practical problem-solving and social organization, while others highlight the role of gradual environmental modification over time. You step carefully, aware that every movement echoes softly, connecting you with countless footsteps that came before, a subtle chorus of survival, skill, and quiet determination echoing through the underground labyrinth. You descend into a narrower corridor, the stone beneath your feet uneven and slick with moisture. Archaeological findings indicate that early humans carefully selected such passageways for both safety and concealment, taking advantage of natural formations to create spaces that were difficult for predators to access. You notice faint indentations along the walls, subtle grooves worn smooth by repeated touch. Certain studies propose these may have served as tactile guides, helping humans navigate in near-complete darkness, a practical solution long before artificial light was available. You pause to run your fingers along the stone, imagining the patience and attention required to move confidently through these underground spaces. A faint flicker of firelight reaches from a side chamber, illuminating shallow depressions in the floor. Observations reveal that these may have functioned as sleeping platforms or resting areas, slightly elevated from the cold, damp ground. Some researchers suggest that the positioning of these depressions was strategic, allowing warmth from nearby hearths to radiate efficiently throughout the chamber. Intriguingly, similar patterns appear in other Ice Age habitation sites, hinting at shared problem-solving approaches among groups separated by distance, yet facing similar environmental challenges. You notice fragments of charcoal embedded in small alcoves along the walls. Evidence suggests that these remnants are from hearths maintained over extended periods, providing warmth, light, and a central point for social interaction. Certain studies indicate that the careful placement of fire sources was crucial, balancing safety, oxygen levels, and illumination across interconnected chambers. You imagine families gathered around these fires, passing skills and knowledge through quiet conversation, ensuring that survival strategies were shared and preserved within the community. The air grows cooler and heavier as you move deeper, carrying a faint mineral scent mingled with moisture. Observations hint that early humans were attuned to such environmental cues, using subtle changes in temperature, humidity, and airflow to determine safe sleeping locations and fire placement. Some researchers argue that this heightened sensitivity shaped social structures, encouraging cooperation, vigilance, and careful resource management. You step lightly, aware that even small adjustments could make the difference between comfort and exposure to cold or damp. You come across small, deliberately smooth depressions along the wall. Archaeological findings indicate that these may have served as niches for tools, gathered food, or other essential items, keeping them organized and accessible. Intriguingly, the same arrangements are found in distant sites, suggesting either shared cultural practices or convergent adaptations to similar challenges. Observations reveal that early humans had an acute sense of spatial efficiency, transforming natural formations into functional spaces that maximize the use of every stone and hollow. A narrow side passage opens to a small chamber where faint scratches and lines decorate the walls. Certain studies propose that these markings may have functioned as navigational aids or mnemonic symbols, helping inhabitants remember routes, resources, or specific locations within the subterranean network. Some researchers argue for a symbolic purpose, perhaps representing rituals, social hierarchy, or shared experiences, though the precise meaning remains uncertain. You run your hand over the scratches, sensing the human presence embedded in stone, a quiet bridge between past and present. Small pools of water glisten in recessed corners, fed by slow drips from above. Evidence suggests that access to these water sources was critical for survival, providing drinking water, assisting with food preparation, and even helping to regulate humidity within living areas. Observations hint that early humans were careful to maintain these sources, avoiding contamination while integrating them into daily routines. You lean closer to examine the surface, noticing subtle ripples caused by dripping water, each tiny movement part of an environment that demanded constant awareness. The chamber slopes gently downward toward a wider hall, the ceiling rising and forming natural alcoves along its edges. Archaeological records reveal that these spaces were likely multifunctional, accommodating sleeping areas, workspaces, and storage zones within a single chamber. Patterns hint at careful planning, with access to hearths, water, and exit routes influencing layout. Some researchers argue that this demonstrates an advanced understanding of spatial organization, while others suggest the design evolved gradually over repeated use. You pause at the center of the hall, sensing the quiet resonance of the space. Observations reveal that sound may have played an important role in human activity underground, with echoes providing both communication and subtle orientation cues. Certain studies propose that early humans used auditory signals to monitor movement or alert others to danger, integrating the natural acoustic properties of the chamber into their daily lives. You take a slow breath, attuning yourself to the soft rhythm of dripping water and distant echoes, imagining the quiet vigilance of those who move through these corridors long before you. At the far end of the chamber, you notice additional recesses and narrow tunnels branching into darkness. Evidence suggests that these extensions were likely used for storage, temporary shelter, or observation, and patterns hint at careful consideration of airflow, temperature, and accessibility. Intriguingly, the repeated use of these tunnels over generations may have gradually shaped their dimensions, creating a complex labyrinth that balanced safety with the practical demands of life underground. You step cautiously, aware that every stone carries the memory of countless human decisions, each one aimed at enduring, adapting, and surviving in a harsh Ice Age world. You enter a narrower chamber. The stone walls slick with moisture, and the air carries a subtle chill that seeps through your clothing. Observations hint that early humans chose these smaller spaces for their protective qualities, using natural constriction to limit exposure to wind and predators. You notice faint scratches along the walls, shallow and deliberate, which some researchers propose may have functioned as route markers or memory aids. Other studies suggest that these markings could have held symbolic meaning, perhaps recording events, group identity, or spiritual significance. You run your hand along one line, sensing the quiet precision and care of human interaction with this environment. A faint warmth reaches from a small hearth tucked into a corner, revealing shallow depressions in the floor that likely served as sleeping areas. Archaeological findings indicate that positioning sleeping clusters near hearths maximized warmth distribution while maintaining access to pathways and storage areas. Observations hint that early humans arranged their sleeping patterns strategically, balancing comfort, safety, and social dynamics within confined underground spaces. You imagine families huddled together, whispering quietly while fires flickered, each person attuned to the rhythms of the chamber and the needs of others. Fragments of charcoal and ash are scattered across the floor, suggesting repeated fire use over extended periods. Certain studies propose that maintaining these hearths required careful attention to airflow and fuel selection, with each fire providing not only heat, but also a focal point for social interaction. Notably, some hearths are positioned near subtle alcoves or ledges, indicating deliberate design to create communal areas that supported both survival and cohesion. You pause to observe the faint traces of smoke that linger in the stone, imagining the flickering shadows on the walls as families worked, ate, and rested in a delicate balance of light and darkness. Small pools of water glimmer in crevices along the chamber floor. Archaeological findings suggest that early humans carefully integrated these sources into daily life, using them for drinking, food preparation, and potentially even hygiene. Observations reveal that proximity to water influenced chamber selection and layout as humans sought to balance access to life-sustaining resources with dryness, safety, and warmth. You lean close to the water, noting tiny ripple patterns, imagining the subtle interaction between humans and their environment that shaped every movement underground. You notice a cluster of animal bones arranged in a faint semicircle. Some researchers propose that these remains were placed intentionally, perhaps as part of ritual practices, while others argue they reflect casual consumption and storage. It remains uncertain whether symbolic or practical considerations predominated, but the deliberate nature of the arrangement hints at human cognition, planning, and social awareness. You crouch to examine one fragment, feeling the weight of history embedded in the smallest detail. A trace of life preserved for millennia beneath the stone, the chamber narrows into a low passage, forcing you to bend and adjust your pace. Certain studies indicate that such constricted spaces may have served as strategic filters, slowing movement for defensive purposes or creating microclimates that regulated temperature and airflow. Observations hint that early humans understood these environmental properties intuitively, arranging passageways to maximize comfort and safety. You brush your hand along the walls, noticing both natural irregularities and subtle modifications that reflect careful attention to space and human needs. Faint grooves and depressions along the floor suggest repeated traffic patterns. Archaeological records reveal that over time, frequent movements shape the stone, guiding individuals along safe routes while discouraging wandering into hazardous areas. Some researchers argue that this demonstrates the development of informal wayfinding systems, a tactile and spatial knowledge embedded in the stone itself. You step carefully, sensing the rhythm and flow of the underground corridors, as if following an invisible map left by countless generations before you. Small alcoves along the walls appear deliberately smoothed, forming shallow niches. Observations hint that these were used to store essential items within reach, keeping tools, food, or personal effects off the damp floor. Certain studies propose that the careful positioning of these niches reflects both practical and social considerations, allowing groups to organize resources efficiently while maintaining communal order. You run your fingers across one surface, imagining the daily routine of selecting, retrieving, and replacing items in a space that demanded constant awareness. You approach a slightly elevated ledge near the center of the chamber. Archaeological findings indicate that such features often served as resting or sleeping platforms, slightly insulated from the cold floor and positioned near hearths for warmth. Patterns hint that groups optimized the use of vertical space, balancing comfort, safety, and social proximity. Observations reveal that repeated use of these ledges over generations may have gradually smoothed surfaces, creating durable platforms that accommodated multiple individuals. You step onto the ledge, feeling the subtle texture beneath your feet, a tangible connection to the lives that once unfolded here. The chamber opens into a small cluster of branching tunnels, the darkness inviting careful exploration. Some researchers propose that these secondary passages allowed for emergency escape, storage, or observation of entrances, while others argue they developed organically through repeated activity over time. Evidence suggests that the layout of these interconnected spaces reflects both environmental adaptation and human ingenuity. You move forward slowly, attuned to every sound and shadow, aware that each step connects you with the centuries of experience embedded in stone, fire, and memory within this subterranean world. You step into a narrow corridor that slopes gently downward, the stone beneath your feet slick in places and uneven in others. Observations hint that early humans selected such passages to connect main living chambers with smaller alcoves used for storage or temporary shelter. Evidence suggests that these narrower tunnels allowed groups to monitor movement and maintain security, keeping critical areas concealed from predators and rival bands. You run your hand along the damp wall, feeling subtle grooves where fingers may have traced the stone over generations, guiding those who moved carefully through near-complete darkness. Small indentations along the floor catch your attention, arranged in irregular clusters. Archaeological studies indicate these were likely used as sleeping or resting areas, slightly elevated to protect against moisture and cold. Notably, similar arrangements appear across multiple Ice Age sites, suggesting shared practices or convergent adaptations to subterranean life. You imagine families huddled together, shifting to conserve warmth, each movement measured to maintain comfort and safety in the confines of the underground. You notice faint traces of charred material near a shallow alcove. Certain researchers propose that these remnants are from small hearths maintained for warmth, cooking, or ritual purposes. Observations hint that fire placement was crucial, not only for survival but also for social interaction, providing a focal point around which knowledge and skills were exchanged. You crouch, imagining the soft glow illuminating attentive faces, the shadows dancing on the walls, and the quiet vigilance required to sustain life in these protected spaces. Pools of water glimmer faintly in depressions along the corridor. Some findings reveal that early humans carefully integrated such sources into their daily routines, balancing accessibility with the need to maintain dry living areas. Observations suggest that proximity to water influenced tunnel placement and chamber selection, allowing groups to manage resources efficiently while avoiding damp-related hazards. You lean closer, observing tiny ripples and faint sediments, imagining the careful planning and awareness required to coexist with this underground environment. Faint scratches and lines on the walls capture your attention, shallow yet deliberate. Certain studies propose these were mnemonic devices, guiding movement, marking resources, or signaling areas of importance. Other researchers argue for a symbolic or ritual interpretation, suggesting that these carvings represented events, shared knowledge, or spiritual beliefs. The precise meaning remains uncertain, yet their presence highlights the ingenuity and attentiveness of early humans navigating complex subterranean networks. The passage opens into a small chamber with multiple alcoves along its walls. Evidence suggests that these were multifunctional spaces, used for sleeping, storage, or quiet communal tasks. Observations reveal that the layout was carefully considered, taking into account airflow, warmth from nearby hearths, and access to water sources. Some researchers propose that the arrangement reflects a nuanced understanding of spatial organization, while others argue it evolved gradually over repeated use. You step carefully, sensing the subtle rhythm of the environment and the echoes of past activity that still linger in the stone. Small clusters of animal bones and fragments lie scattered across the chamber. Certain studies indicate these may have been left as meals, while others suggest ritual or symbolic significance. Notably, the deliberate placement and partial charring of some remains hints at careful planning and sustained engagement with the space. You lean closer, examining a fragment and imagining the human presence behind it, the preparation, consumption, and management of vital resources in a challenging environment. You notice vertical depressions along one wall, forming shallow niches. Archaeological records suggest these were used to hold tools, gathered food, or personal items, keeping essentials organized and protected. Observations hint that careful use of vertical space maximized the utility of confined chambers while maintaining communal order. You run your fingers along one niche, picturing the daily routines of early humans who moved deliberately, tended fires, and arranged their environment with careful attention to both function and safety. The chamber slopes gently toward a low tunnel leading further underground. Evidence suggests that such passages may have been used for monitoring entrances, moving between chambers, or reaching water sources. Observations hint at the deliberate balancing of accessibility, safety, and environmental conditions, with early humans optimizing their surroundings to meet practical needs. You pause, attuning yourself to the faint echoes of dripping water, imagining the careful observation and decision-making that defined life in these subterranean spaces. At the end of the tunnel, a wider chamber opens, revealing additional alcoves, hearth traces, and narrow corridors branching into darkness. Archaeological studies indicate that such chambers often served as hubs of activity, integrating living, work, and storage areas within a single protected environment. Some researchers propose that this complexity reflects early social organization and sophisticated spatial planning, while others highlight the role of repeated occupation and environmental adaptation. You step into the space, aware of the quiet resonance, and sense that every stone, groove, and depression carries the presence and ingenuity of humans who lived and thrived in these underground networks long before recorded history. You step into a chamber where the walls curve gently, forming a natural alcove that seems almost designed for observation or quiet activity. Yet investigations reveal faint markings along the stone surfaces, circular impressions and linear scratches that suggest deliberate human intervention. Some experts propose these were symbolic, perhaps representing events, directions, or communal memory, while others suggest they may have functioned as practical guides through a complex network of tunnels. You run your fingers across the grooves, feeling the subtle texture and imagining the hands that traced them centuries ago, connecting past and present through touch. Small hearth remnants catch your eye, scattered in shallow depressions across the chamber floor. Research shows that these fires were carefully tended, balancing warmth with ventilation and providing a social focal point in the cold underground environment. Observations suggest that the positioning of hearths also helped define activity zones, with families clustering around flames for meals, warmth, and shared work. You imagine the quiet rhythm of daily life here, where conversation was soft, movements deliberate, and attention constantly attuned to both survival and the subterranean surroundings. Along one wall, faint lines form subtle patterns, some intersecting while others run parallel. Certain findings reveal that these may have been mnemonic devices, marking routes or locations within the tunnels, or perhaps conveying information about water sources, food caches, or safe sleeping areas. Notably, similar markings appear across Ice Age sites in Britain and continental Europe, suggesting shared cultural practices or convergent solutions to challenges of underground life. You pause to trace one line, sensing the silent communication that passed from generation to generation. You notice small depressions in the floor, irregular but carefully placed. Studies imply that these were used for sleeping or work areas, slightly elevated to avoid cold and dampness. Observations suggest that their strategic placement allowed multiple individuals to occupy the space efficiently, while maintaining proximity to hearths and other essential resources. Interestingly, this form of spatial organization appears consistently across subterranean sites, indicating a sophisticated understanding of environmental constraints. The air grows cooler as you advance toward a narrow passage, carrying faint scents of mineral-rich water and residual smoke. Research shows that early humans were highly attuned to such environmental cues, using subtle changes in air quality, temperature, and humidity to make decisions about movement, resting areas, and fire placement. Some experts propose that these cues also influence social organization, helping groups coordinate activities and maintain safety. You step carefully, aware that every sound, scent, and subtle change in airflow would have mattered to those who inhabited these chambers. Faint clusters of bones, both charred and intact, are scattered near one wall, analyses point to their use as food remains, though the placement of some fragments suggests ritual or symbolic significance. Observations hint that early humans were intentional in their handling of resources, balancing sustenance with social and cultural behaviours. You crouch to examine a small fragment, imagining the deliberate care with which it was placed, a tangible record of life, survival, and human ingenuity preserved beneath the stone. Small ledges along the chamber walls catch your torchlight, smooth from repeated use. Research shows that these may have served as sleeping platforms, work surfaces, or seating areas, maximizing vertical space while maintaining safety from damp floors. Observations suggest that the arrangement of these ledges allowed early humans to organize their activities efficiently, maintaining communal cohesion while managing environmental challenges. You place a hand on one surface, sensing the subtle history embedded in the stone and the rhythm of human life that once filled this space. You move into a side corridor, the ceiling lowering and forcing careful navigation. Some experts propose that constricted tunnels functioned as strategic control points, allowing inhabitants to monitor movement through the underground network while regulating airflow and temperature. Investigations reveal that such design may have emerged both from natural formations and intentional modifications, reflecting a sophisticated adaptation to the environment. You run your hand along the damp wall, feeling the grooves and depressions that tell stories of human presence and ingenuity. Along the floor, small indentations form irregular patterns. Observation suggests that these were maintained as repeated pathways or activity zones, guiding movement and preserving organization within the chamber. Research shows that over time, frequent use smooths some areas while leaving others more rugged, creating subtle cues for navigation and communal behavior. You step lightly, attuned to the rhythm of the space, imagining the careful awareness required to move, rest, and work within this underground environment. The chamber opens into a slightly larger hall, its walls marked by faint scratches, small ledges, and hearth remnants. Archaeologists have found that similar multifunctional spaces across Ice Age sites served as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns hint at both practical and social considerations, reflecting attention to warmth, resource access, and group coordination. You pause, sensing the subtle resonance of the chamber, aware that every stone, every groove, and every depression carries echoes of human life, ingenuity, and adaptation from thousands of years ago. You follow a narrow tunnel deeper into the underground network, the walls closing in slightly and the air growing cooler with each step. Observation suggests that such passages may have been used to regulate movement between chambers, providing controlled access to hearths, storage areas, and sleeping spaces. Certain studies indicate that early humans were deliberate in shaping these corridors, smoothing rough surfaces and creating shallow depressions to aid navigation in low light. You run your hand along the stone, feeling the faint grooves and worn patches, each one a silent record of repeated passage over centuries. Small hearth remnants lie in a corner, their charcoal faint but discernible. Archaeological findings indicate that these fires were maintained for warmth, cooking, and social gatherings, carefully balanced to minimize smoke while providing sufficient light. Notably, the positioning of hearths near alcoves and ledges allowed inhabitants to occupy the space efficiently while remaining close to essential resources. You imagine families or small groups clustered around the flames, quietly exchanging knowledge, tending food, and observing one another, each movement measured to maintain comfort and safety. Along the walls, subtle carvings form linear and circular patterns, some intersecting while others run parallel. Some researchers propose that these were navigational markers, indicating routes, exits, or resource locations within the underground complex. Observations reveal that alternative interpretations include symbolic or ritualistic purposes, perhaps recording events, marking significant sites, or conveying communal memory. You run your fingers lightly over the carvings, sensing the care and intention behind each mark, a delicate language of stone. The floor shows clusters of shallow depressions, likely used as sleeping or resting areas. Evidence indicates that these platforms were slightly elevated to provide insulation from cold and damp surfaces, while allowing proximity to hearths. Certain findings reveal that the placement of these areas was strategic, maximizing both warmth and efficiency within the confined chamber. You pause to consider how every subtle modification, elevation, slope, or niche reflected practical problem-solving combined with deep environmental awareness. A small pool of water glimmers in a recessed alcove, fed by slow drips from above. Observations suggest that early humans utilized these natural reservoirs for drinking, food preparation, and hygiene, carefully monitoring and conserving the resource. Some experts propose that the positioning of water sources influenced the layout of the entire underground network, shaping sleeping, cooking, and storage areas around access points. You lean closer to the pool, noting tiny ripples and the faint sedimentary patterns, imagining how these subtle features would have guided daily activity and decision-making. You notice faint scratches along the walls near narrow side passages. Certain studies suggest these may have served as guides or warnings, marking safe paths, exits, or hazards within the complex. Observations hint at a dual purpose, practical navigation, and symbolic representation, perhaps reinforcing group memory or social structure. You trace one line with your fingertips, connecting mentally with the human presence embedded in stone. A quiet bridge between past and present. Small clusters of bones and burnt fragments lie scattered in corners. Archaeological research indicates that these may have been remnants of meals or carefully preserved resources. Patterns hint at intentional placement, suggesting a combination of survival strategy and social or ritual behavior. Interestingly, similar arrangements are found across multiple Ice Age sites, reflecting recurring strategies for resource management and communal activity. You examine one fragment, imagining the deliberation and care that guided its placement and use. Along the walls, shallow niches rise slightly from the floor, likely serving as storage for tools, food, or personal items. Observations suggest that these vertical spaces maximize the usability of confined areas while maintaining organization within the group. Some researchers propose that consistent placement across sites indicates shared techniques or cultural conventions, while others argue the layout evolved from repeated interaction with the environment. You run your hand across one niche, feeling the subtle curvature and imagining the daily routines of those who depended on these spaces for survival. You approach a junction where several narrow tunnels converge, the ceiling dipping slightly as the paths intertwine. Certain findings reveal that such intersections may have functioned as observation points, allowing inhabitants to monitor entrances or detect threats. Observations suggest that the design reflects both environmental adaptation and strategic planning, with movement controlled by awareness of space, light, and airflow. You step carefully, sensing the rhythm of the underground, attuned to echoes, subtle drafts, and the centuries of human presence embedded in stone. The chamber opens into a slightly larger hall, revealing multiple alcoves, faint hearths, and narrow passages stretching into shadow. Archaeological records show that similar spaces served as central hubs for living, work, and storage, integrating practical needs with social interaction. Patterns hint at sophisticated planning, though some areas appear to have evolved gradually through repeated use and adaptation. You pause to absorb the quiet resonance of the space, aware that every stone, scratch, and depression carries the story of human ingenuity, endurance, and life preserved in this subterranean world. You step carefully into a chamber where the ceiling lowers, forcing you to bend slightly, and the air grows cooler and damp. Observations suggest that such low passages may have provided both shelter and protection, controlling movement and access within the underground network. Certain studies indicate that early humans understood these spaces intuitively, using constricted areas to monitor entry points and maintain security. You run your hand along the walls, feeling subtle grooves and depressions formed by repeated human contact over centuries, each mark a silent testament to survival and adaptation. Faint traces of charcoal and ash catch your torchlight near shallow alcoves. Archaeological findings indicate that small hearths were maintained here, providing warmth, light, and a focal point for communal activity. Interestingly, the positioning of these hearths appears consistent across multiple Ice Age sites, suggesting shared practices or convergent problem-solving strategies among groups. You imagine the soft glow illuminating attentive faces, shadows dancing across stone walls as families and small bands carried out essential tasks, each movement deliberate to conserve energy and maintain warmth. Along the floor, subtle depressions hint at sleeping or resting areas. Evidence suggests that these spaces were slightly elevated or reinforced to protect against dampness and cold, while maintaining proximity to essential hearths and water sources. Observations reveal that early humans may have clustered individuals strategically, balancing social cohesion with environmental considerations. You step carefully across the chamber, sensing the rhythm and careful organization that guided daily life in the subterranean world. Small pools of water glimmer in the corners, fed by slow drips from the ceiling. Research shows that these natural reservoirs were integrated into daily activity, providing drinking water and assisting with food preparation. Patterns hint at careful management, as inhabitants sought to maximize access while avoiding excessive moisture or contamination. You lean close, observing the subtle ripples and sediment, imagining how early humans interpreted these cues to make critical decisions about resource use and movement within the underground network. Faint carvings along the walls form lines, circles, and abstract patterns. Certain studies propose these markings may have functioned as navigation aids, mnemonic devices, or symbolic representations of events or locations. Observations suggest a dual purpose, practical guidance combined with a form of cultural memory. You run your fingers lightly across the shallow grooves, sensing the human presence embedded in stone, a silent dialogue between generations of underground inhabitants. Fragments of animal bones, some charred and some intact, lie scattered across a small ledge. Archaeological findings indicate they were likely remnants of meals or stored resources, yet the deliberate placement hints at more complex behavior, possibly ritual or symbolic. Certain researchers argue that these arrangements reflect communal planning and careful management of essential resources. You crouch to examine a small fragment, imagining the deliberation and care that governed life in such a challenging environment. The chamber opens into a slightly larger hall, where alcoves, hearth traces, and narrow side passages converge. Observation suggests these larger spaces functioned as hubs, integrating living, work, and storage areas within a single protected environment. Analyses point to both intentional design and gradual evolution, as repeated use shaped the layout to meet practical and social needs. You step carefully through the hall, attuned to faint echoes, subtle drafts, and the centuries of human activity preserved in stone. Along the walls, shallow niches and ledges hint at carefully organized storage. Some experts propose these held essential tools, foodstuffs, or personal items, maximizing space while maintaining order. Patterns suggest that early humans understood the value of vertical organization, Using every surface efficiently, you run your fingers along one niche, feeling the smooth wear of centuries of use, imagining daily routines shaped by both necessity and environmental awareness. Small, narrow side tunnels branch off the hall, their low ceilings creating an intimate, enclosed atmosphere. Observations suggest these may have been used for temporary shelter, storage, or observation points. Certain findings reveal that repeated human activity gradually shaped the tunnels, smoothing surfaces and forming shallow steps or depressions. You step lightly, aware that every passage carries the imprint of countless footsteps, decisions, and adaptations that enabled survival in a harsh Ice Age world. At the far end of the hall, a faint light from an adjacent chamber highlights additional alcoves, hearth traces, and subtle carvings on the walls. Archaeological records show that such chambers served as multifunctional spaces, combining practical needs with social interaction and environmental adaptation. Observations hint at careful attention to airflow, warmth, and movement, demonstrating that early humans understood the complex dynamics of subterranean living. You pause to take in the quiet resonance of the chamber, aware that every stone, mark, and indentation carries the presence of those who navigated this labyrinth thousands of years ago. You step carefully into a narrow chamber, where the stone walls curve inward, damp with condensation and cool to the touch. Evidence indicates that early humans selected such spaces to provide shelter from harsh winds above and to maintain warmth within the underground network. You notice faint scratches along the walls, shallow and irregular, which some researchers propose may have functioned as navigational markers or memory aids. Observations show that these subtle lines were often repeated in multiple corridors, hinting at a shared understanding of the tunnel's layout. You trace one pattern with your fingertips, imagining the concentration and care required to leave such marks in near-complete darkness. Small hearths occupy shallow depressions along the floor, remnants of fires that once warmed and illuminated the space. Research suggests that the positioning of these hearths was carefully considered, providing heat without compromising airflow or safety. Observations hint that fire also served as a social focal point, bringing families together for meals, conversation, and instruction. You imagine the quiet flicker of flames reflecting on attentive faces, shadows moving gently across walls as stories and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. A shallow pool of water glimmers in the corner, fed by steady drips from the ceiling. Certain studies reveal that access to such water was critical for drinking, food preparation, and maintaining living areas. Patterns suggest that early humans planned sleeping and activity areas to maintain proximity, while minimizing damp exposure. You lean closer to the pool, observing the faint ripples, imagining the careful attention required to use it effectively without contaminating the resource. Faint carvings line the walls, forming both linear and circular patterns. Investigations hint that these may have served dual purposes, guiding passage through the tunnels and recording communal knowledge or events. Some researchers propose that symbolic meaning was attached to these markings, perhaps representing seasonal changes, hunting success, or social hierarchy. You run your fingers over the grooves, sensing the quiet communication left for future generations navigating the same stone corridors. Fragments of animal bones are scattered near a ledge, some charred, others intact. Archaeological records demonstrate that these remains were likely the product of meals, though placement hints at ritual or symbolic intent. Observations suggest that early humans intentionally arranged certain bones, creating a subtle order that reflected both survival needs and cultural practices. You examine one fragment, imagining the care taken in both preparation and storage, a delicate balance between sustenance and social structure. You step into a slightly wider hall where the ceiling rises, creating natural alcoves along the walls. Research shows that these spaces were multifunctional, used for sleeping, cooking, storage, and communal activity. Patterns imply that proximity to hearths, water sources, and passageways was deliberate, reflecting careful attention to environmental and social factors. You pause, feeling the rhythm of the space, as if the stone itself carries the echo of human movement and interaction from thousands of years ago. Along one side, shallow niches rise from the floor, likely used to store tools or gathered food. Observations show that vertical organization was an important strategy for maximizing limited space while maintaining accessibility. Some researchers propose that repeated use and refinement over generations created standardized layouts, allowing each group to adapt the environment efficiently. You run your fingers across one niche, sensing the subtle polish from centuries of handling and imagining the daily routines that shaped this subterranean environment. A low tunnel branches from the hall, its ceiling close and walls slick. Investigations hint that such tunnels were designed to regulate airflow, maintain temperature, and provide controlled access to adjacent chambers. Certain studies suggest that these narrow passages also functioned as observation points, allowing inhabitants to detect movement or approaching threats. You step carefully, attuned to the subtle shifts in air, sound, and texture, imagining how early humans interpreted these cues to survive in a complex, dangerous landscape. Small depressions in the floor form irregular clusters, likely serving as sleeping or work areas. Research indicates that these patterns were functional, maximizing comfort, warmth, and proximity to resources. Observation suggests that spatial organization also reinforced social cohesion, with placement reflecting familial or communal roles. You step lightly across the chamber, aware that every mark in the stone reflects careful planning, adaptability, and experience passed quietly through generations. At the end of the tunnel, a wider chamber opens, revealing alcoves, hearth remnants, and subtle carvings along the walls. Archaeological records demonstrate that such spaces functioned as hubs, integrating living, work, and storage areas. Patterns hint at both intentional design and gradual adaptation, balancing practical needs with social interaction. You pause, sensing the resonance of the space, aware that every stone, groove, and indentation carries the presence, ingenuity, and resilience of humans who navigated this subterranean labyrinth long before recorded history. You move carefully into a narrow chamber, the walls slick with moisture and the air carrying a faint chill that brushes against your skin. Observations suggest that these confined spaces were chosen for protection, offering concealment from predators and harsh weather above ground. You notice small grooves along the stone, shallow and deliberate, which certain studies propose were used as tactile guides or markers for movement through the labyrinth. Patterns hint at a practical system, subtly directing inhabitants while simultaneously conveying communal knowledge. You run your fingers over the stone, sensing the continuity of human presence across centuries. Faint hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions, their charred edges a reminder of sustained fire use. Archaeological records demonstrate that these fires provided warmth, light, and a gathering point for social interaction. Some researchers propose that the placement of hearths also regulated airflow, creating zones where conversation, observation, and work could occur without compromising the safety of the chamber. You imagine families clustered around these flames, tending food, sharing information, and maintaining vigilance against the dangers outside. A shallow pool glimmers in a recessed corner, fed by slow drips from the ceiling. Research indicates that access to water was vital for daily survival, from drinking to preparing food and maintaining the chamber's microclimate. Observations reveal that early humans positioned sleeping areas and hearths strategically in relation to water sources, balancing accessibility with dryness and warmth. You lean closer, noticing subtle ripples on the water's surface, imagining how the careful observation of these cues guided movement and behaviour. Along the walls, faint carvings form intersecting lines and circular patterns. Investigations hint that these may have functioned as both navigational guides and symbolic markers, recording events, resources, or communal memory. Some researchers suggest a ritualistic element, possibly representing achievements, seasonal changes, or social structures. You trace a line with your fingertips, connecting with the intent and thoughtfulness of those who left their mark in stone long ago. Fragments of animal bones lie scattered in alcoves, some charred, others intact. Archaeological findings indicate these were likely remnants of meals, while patterns hint at intentional placement. Observations suggest that such arrangements may have reinforced social order or served as subtle ritualistic expressions tied to survival practices. You examine a small fragment, contemplating the care and planning required to store and consume resources in an underground environment where every decision affected survival. You step toward a passage that slopes gently downward, the ceiling low and the walls slick with moisture. Certain studies reveal that these connecting tunnels were used to regulate airflow, maintain temperature, and monitor movement throughout the network. Patterns imply that early humans intuitively understood these environmental dynamics, shaping corridors to maximize both comfort and safety. You move slowly, attuned to the faint echoes, shifts in temperature, and subtle airflow. Imagining the sensory awareness required for survival, shallow depressions along the floor suggest sleeping or working areas, positioned near hearths for warmth and accessibility. Archaeological records show that careful spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist in confined spaces while maintaining communal order. Observations hint that these patterns may also have reinforced social cohesion, with placement reflecting familial roles or collaborative tasks. You step lightly, sensing the careful balance between practical needs and social dynamics preserved in the stone. Along one wall, small niches rise slightly from the floor, likely used for storing tools, food, or personal items. Research indicates that vertical organization maximized the limited space, while ensuring items remained accessible. Some experts propose that repeated refinement of these niches over generations resulted in standardized layouts, facilitating daily routines and survival strategies. You run your hand along a smooth surface, imagining the consistent care required to maintain organization in a challenging environment. The passage opens into a wider chamber, its ceiling rising and forming natural alcoves. Investigations hint that this space functioned as a central hub, integrating hearths, sleeping areas, and storage zones. Observations reveal that layout decisions balanced environmental factors, social needs, and access to water and air currents. Patterns imply both intentional design and organic adaptation, creating a space that accommodated human life with efficiency and awareness. At the far end, multiple side tunnels branch into darkness, their entrances subtly concealed by natural stone formations. Archaeological findings suggest that these branches may have been used for observation, storage, or escape routes. Some researchers propose that repeated use over generations gradually modified the tunnels, while others argue that many features reflect natural formations selectively adapted for human habitation. You step carefully, attuned to the echoes, subtle drafts, and lingering presence of centuries of human activity embedded in the walls, floors, and ceilings around you. You enter a chamber where the ceiling dips low, forcing careful navigation, and the air grows cooler, carrying a faint scent of damp stone and lingering smoke. Observations suggest that early humans may have deliberately chosen such enclosed spaces to control entry and exit, providing safety from predators while maintaining oversight of key areas. Certain studies indicate that constricted passages also helped regulate temperature and airflow, creating microclimates suitable for extended habitation. You run your fingers along the walls, feeling shallow grooves left by repeated contact, each mark a subtle record of past movements and careful planning. Faint traces of hearths appear in depressions along the floor, their charred edges signalling prolonged fire use. Research shows that these fires served multiple purposes: warmth, light, cooking, and social gathering. Observations reveal that their strategic placement allowed groups to cluster around heat, while keeping pathways clear for movement and storage. You imagine families huddled close, whispering softly, tending fires, and passing down knowledge, their coordinated activities forming a rhythm essential for survival in the subterranean environment. Small pools of water rest in recessed areas of the chamber. Archaeological findings suggest that access to these sources was carefully considered, balancing convenience with the need to maintain dry living areas. Patterns hint that proximity to water influenced the placement of sleeping areas, hearths, and storage zones, reflecting an intuitive understanding of resource management. You kneel to examine the pools, noting subtle ripples and sediments, imagining how early humans observed and adapted to these natural features to sustain daily life. Along the walls, shallow scratches and carvings form intersecting lines and abstract shapes. Some researchers propose that these served as navigation aids, guiding movement through the complex network of tunnels. Others suggest symbolic or ritualistic purposes, potentially recording events, marking significant locations, or encoding communal knowledge. Observations hint that the markings were multifunctional, serving both practical and cultural needs. You trace a line with your fingertips, sensing the human intent embedded in the stone. A quiet connection across millennia. Fragments of animal bones lie scattered in alcoves and depressions. Investigations reveal that these were likely remnants of meals, while the arrangement of some fragments suggests deliberate placement for storage, ritual, or social signaling. Patterns imply careful planning and attention to communal needs, demonstrating that early humans engaged with their environment thoughtfully and strategically. You examine a charred fragment, imagining the precision and care required to manage resources in a harsh subterranean landscape. The chamber opens into a slightly larger hall, its walls lined with alcoves and subtle ledges. Archaeological records demonstrate that these spaces served as multifunctional areas, integrating sleeping, cooking, and storage. Observations indicate that layout decisions accounted for airflow, warmth, and access to water, reflecting sophisticated spatial organization. Certain studies propose that the hall functioned as a central hub for group activity, reinforcing social cohesion while balancing environmental demands. Shallow niches rise from the floor along one side of the chamber. Research shows that these were likely used to store tools, food, or personal belongings, maximizing vertical space within the confined area. Observations suggest that consistent placement of niches across sites indicates a shared understanding or cultural convention, guiding daily routines efficiently. You run your fingers across a smooth niche surface, imagining the careful attention required to maintain organization over extended periods. A narrow tunnel branches off the hall, its ceiling low and walls damp. Analyses point to strategic purposes regulating airflow, monitoring movement, and connecting secondary chambers. Some researchers propose that the tunnel also provided hidden observation points, allowing inhabitants to detect activity in adjacent spaces. Patterns suggest a combination of natural formation and deliberate modification, reflecting a deep understanding of environmental properties. You step carefully, attuned to subtle drafts, faint echoes, and the rhythm of human presence embedded in the stone. Along the floor, depressions form irregular patterns, likely serving as sleeping or activity areas. Evidence indicates that careful spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social cohesion. Observations hint that the patterns also reinforced group structure, with proximity reflecting familial or cooperative roles. You step lightly, sensing the logic and care that guided movement, organization, and survival in this subterranean network. At the end of the tunnel, a larger chamber opens, revealing additional alcoves, hearth remnants, and faint carvings on the walls. Archaeological records suggest that such chambers functioned as hubs of activity, integrating living, work, and storage spaces. Patterns imply intentional planning, while repeated use over generations shaped the environment organically. You pause, sensing the quiet resonance of the chamber, aware that every stoner groove and depression carries the ingenuity, resilience, and lived experience of those who navigated this underground world thousands of years ago. You step into a narrow corridor that twists subtly, the stone walls slick with condensation and cool beneath your fingertips. Evidence indicates that early humans used these connecting passages strategically, linking central chambers with smaller alcoves for storage, sleeping, or temporary refuge. Observations point to repeated modifications over generations, smoothing rough surfaces and creating shallow depressions to aid movement in near-total darkness. You run your hand along the wall, feeling the subtle texture and imagining countless hands tracing the same route, guiding people safely through the underground network. Small hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions along the floor, their charred edges a reminder of fire carefully tended for warmth, light, and communal gatherings. Certain studies reveal that hearth placement was deliberate, balancing heat with airflow to reduce smoke accumulation while illuminating key areas. You imagine families clustered around these flames, whispering quietly, sharing knowledge, preparing meals, and maintaining watchfulness. Patterns suggest that the arrangement of hearths reinforced both social cohesion and efficient use of space within the confined chambers. Faint carvings line the walls, forming intersecting lines, circular motifs, and subtle geometric patterns. Investigations show that these markings may have served multiple purposes, guiding navigation, recording events, or conveying shared knowledge. Some researchers propose that the symbols also had symbolic or ritual significance, encoding cultural memory within the stone itself. You trace a shallow groove with your fingertips, sensing the deliberate attention behind each mark and the silent dialogue it preserved across generations. Small pools of water glimmer in recessed corners, fed by slow drips from above. Research suggests that access to water was a critical consideration in selecting chamber locations, supporting drinking, food preparation, and maintaining environmental balance. Observations point to careful spatial organization, with sleeping areas and hearths positioned to optimize proximity to these natural resources while minimizing damp exposure. You lean closer to the water, noticing subtle ripples and sediment, imagining how humans monitored and interpreted these micro-environments to survive. Fragments of animal bones lie scattered in alcoves and depressions, some charred and others intact. Archaeological records demonstrate that these remains were likely from meals, yet the arrangement of certain clusters hints at symbolic or ritual activity. Some researchers propose that deliberate placement reflected social organization or memorial practices within the group. You examine a small fragment, sensing the thoughtful care required to manage resources in a harsh underground environment. Along one wall, shallow niches rise slightly from the floor, likely serving as storage spaces for tools, gathered food, or personal items. Analyses point to the repeated use and refinement of these niches, suggesting an intuitive understanding of vertical space and efficient organization. Observations reveal that consistent positioning across multiple sites may indicate shared cultural practices or convergent problem-solving strategies among early humans. You run your fingers across one niche, imagining the daily routines and attention to detail required to maintain order. A narrow tunnel branches from the chamber, its ceiling low and walls slick with moisture. Investigations hint that such side passages were used for multiple functions: observation of entrances, emergency escape routes, and access to water or other chambers. Some studies suggest that repeated use gradually shaped the tunnel, smoothing walls and forming shallow steps, reflecting a combination of natural formation and human modification. You step carefully, attuned to subtle drafts, faint echoes, and the centuries of movement encoded in the stone. The floor contains small depressions forming irregular clusters, likely representing sleeping areas or work zones. Research indicates that careful spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist comfortably while maintaining social organization. Observations suggest that these layouts also reflected hierarchy or cooperative roles within the group, subtly guiding behavior and daily routines. You step lightly, imagining the quiet deliberation that shaped life in this underground labyrinth. You enter a wider chamber where natural alcoves, hearth traces, and faint wall carvings converge. Archaeological records demonstrate that these spaces functioned as central hubs, integrating living, work, and storage areas. Patterns suggest both practical and social considerations, with access to warmth, water, and pathways carefully balanced. You pause to absorb the quiet resonance of the space, aware that every stone, groove, and depression carries the presence, ingenuity, and survival strategies of humans who inhabited this subterranean world thousands of years ago. At the far end, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Certain studies reveal that these branches were likely used for observation, storage, or escape, while traces hint at gradual shaping through repeated human activity. Observations indicate that the layout reflects a sophisticated understanding of environmental factors, human behavior, and group needs. You step carefully, attuned to echoes, drafts, and the lingering imprint of countless generations who navigated these passages with skill, awareness, and resilience. You move into a low, narrow tunnel that twists gently, the walls damp and cold to the touch, carrying the faint scent of earth and lingering smoke. Evidence indicates that early humans utilized such constrained spaces strategically, both to control access to key areas and to monitor movement within the underground network. Observations point to subtle modifications along the walls and floor, smoothing rough surfaces and creating shallow depressions that guided navigation. You run your hand along the stone, feeling the faint impressions left by generations of humans moving carefully through the dark, imagining their awareness of every step in a place where misjudgment could be fatal. Small hearths are visible in shallow depressions along the floor, the remnants of fires maintained for warmth, cooking, and social gatherings. Research suggests that the careful placement of these hearths was essential, balancing light, heat, and airflow to avoid smoke build-up while illuminating activity zones. Observations show that hearths also acted as focal points for group interaction, providing a space for passing knowledge, sharing meals, and maintaining cohesion. You picture early humans gathered around the faint glow, faces softened by firelight, attentive to each movement and sound in the confined space, Along the walls, shallow scratches and faint carvings form patterns that intersect or run parallel to one another. Certain studies propose that these markings functioned as mnemonic devices, guiding passage through complex tunnels or recording locations of water, food caches, and safe areas. Observations hint at an additional symbolic purpose, potentially encoding social memory, seasonal cycles, or communal rituals. You run your fingers across one pattern, sensing the deliberate care and intention of those who left their mark long before your arrival. Pools of water glimmer in recessed corners, fed by slow drips from above. Archaeological records indicate that access to water was a critical consideration for survival, supporting drinking, food preparation, and environmental balance. Notably, the placement of sleeping and activity areas often reflects careful attention to these water sources, balancing convenience with dryness and warmth. You lean closer, observing subtle ripples, imagining how early humans interpreted and utilized these micro-resources to maintain daily life underground. Fragments of animal bones, some charred and some intact, are scattered across alcoves and depressions. Observations suggest they were remnants of meals, yet certain clusters indicate intentional placement, possibly tied to ritual or social practices. Some researchers propose that these arrangements reflected resource management, territorial claims, or symbolic behavior. You crouch to examine a small fragment, picturing the careful attention involved in both preparation and storage, a testament to the ingenuity required to survive in a harsh, subterranean environment. Along one wall, shallow niches rise slightly, likely used to store tools, gathered food, or personal items. Patterns suggest that these features were carefully positioned to maximize limited space and maintain organization within the chamber. Research shows that consistent niche placement across multiple sites may indicate shared cultural practices or convergent problem-solving strategies. You run your hand along the smooth surface, imagining the repetitive daily routines that shaped and maintained these spaces over generations. A narrow tunnel branches from the chamber, its low ceiling forcing deliberate, careful movement. Certain studies indicate that such passages functioned as observation points, escape routes, and connections to other chambers. Observations reveal that repeated use gradually shaped the tunnels, smoothing surfaces and creating shallow steps. Evidence points to a combination of natural formation and human adaptation, reflecting both practical necessity and environmental awareness. You step slowly, attuned to subtle drafts, faint echoes, and the lingering presence of generations who navigated this labyrinth with skill and vigilance. The floor contains small depressions forming irregular clusters, likely used as sleeping or work areas. Archaeological findings demonstrate that spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social organization. Observations suggest that these arrangements reinforced hierarchy, cooperative roles, and careful resource allocation. You step lightly, sensing the quiet logic and adaptability embedded in the underground layout, where survival depended on awareness, order, and coordination. You enter a wider chamber where alcoves, hearth traces, and faint carvings converge. Research suggests that these chambers served as central hubs, integrating multiple functions: living, cooking, storage, and social interaction. Patterns hint at both intentional planning and organic evolution, shaped over generations of repeated use. Observations reveal that proximity to warmth, water, and passageways was carefully considered, ensuring both comfort and safety. You pause, absorbing the quiet resonance of the chamber, aware that every stone, groove, and indentation preserves the ingenuity and resilience of the humans who inhabited this space thousands of years ago. At the far end, Small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Evidence indicates that these branches served as observation points, storage areas, or emergency escape routes. Certain studies propose that repeated occupation gradually modified these spaces, blending natural formation with deliberate adaptation. Observations point to a sophisticated understanding of environmental conditions, social dynamics, and spatial organization. You step carefully, attuned to echoes, drafts, and centuries of human presence embedded in the stone, feeling the quiet persistence of life in this ancient underground world. You step into a low, twisting corridor where the walls glisten with moisture, and the air carries a cool, mineral scent. Evidence indicates that early humans deliberately chose such passageways to regulate movement, creating controlled access to sleeping areas, hearths, and storage spaces. Observations show that subtle depressions and grooves along the floor and walls guided navigation, ensuring that individuals could move safely even in darkness. You run your fingers along the stone, sensing the continuity of human activity and the quiet precision required to traverse these underground passages. Small hearth remnants occupy depressions in the floor, their charred remains signalling repeated use for warmth and cooking. Certain studies reveal that the careful placement of hearths balanced heat distribution with airflow, reducing smoke accumulation while illuminating the chamber. Observations point to the social significance of these fires, serving as focal points for communication, instruction, and communal gathering. You imagine families clustered around the flames, exchanging skills, tending meals, and maintaining vigilance in a space where every movement mattered. Faint carvings and scratches appear along the walls, intersecting and overlapping in complex patterns. Investigations show that some may have served as navigational aids, while others could have conveyed symbolic or ritualistic information. Patterns hint that these markings encoded knowledge about water sources, food caches, and safe passages. You trace a shallow groove with your fingertips, sensing the careful intent behind each line, a silent form of communication preserved over generations. Small pools of water rest in recessed areas, glimmering faintly in the dim torchlight. Research indicates that these sources were critical for survival, providing drinking water and supporting food preparation. Observations suggest that sleeping areas and hearths were often positioned with consideration of these natural reservoirs, balancing accessibility with protection from dampness. You lean closer to the water, noting subtle ripples, and imagine early humans using keen observation to interpret the environment and plan their movements accordingly. Fragments of animal bones, some charred, others intact, lie scattered in alcoves. Archaeological records demonstrate that these remains were likely meals, though some clusters hint at intentional placement or ritual significance. Certain studies propose that such arrangements reflect social organization, territorial awareness, or symbolic practices tied to survival strategies. You crouch to examine a small fragment, picturing the careful preparation and deliberation that guided life in this subterranean environment. Along one wall, shallow niches rise slightly from the floor, likely used for storage of tools, food, or personal items. Observations show that vertical organization allowed groups to maximize limited space while maintaining order. Some researchers propose that repeated use refined these niches over generations, creating standardized layouts that facilitated efficient daily routines. You run your hand along a niche, imagining how each object was carefully placed, retrieved, and returned in the rhythm of survival. A narrow tunnel branches off the main chamber, its low ceiling and damp walls requiring careful movement. Evidence indicates that such side passages functioned as observation points, storage zones, or emergency exits. Analyses suggest that repeated human use gradually modified the natural rock, smoothing surfaces and creating shallow steps. Observations hint that early humans combined natural formations with deliberate adaptations to shape functional, safe, and navigable spaces. Shallow depressions along the floor form clusters, likely used for sleeping, working, or sitting. Research shows that spacing was intentional, allowing multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social cohesion and organization. Patterns suggest that sleeping arrangements reinforced familial or cooperative roles, subtly guiding behavior and daily routines within confined chambers. You step carefully, aware of the thoughtful design embedded in the stone, balancing practical and social needs. You enter a larger chamber where multiple alcoves, hearth remnants, and faint wall carvings converge. Investigations reveal that these spaces served as central hubs, integrating cooking, sleeping, storage, and social activity. Observations suggest careful planning of proximity to fire, water, and exits, while repeated use over generations created organic evolution of the layout. You pause, feeling the quiet resonance of the chamber, aware that each stone, groove, and niche carries centuries of human ingenuity, adaptation, and resilience. At the far end of the chamber, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Evidence indicates that these extensions were likely used for observation, storage, or emergency escape. Some researchers propose that gradual modifications over time blended natural formation with human adaptation, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of environmental conditions, social structure, and spatial organization. You step forward slowly, attuned to echoes, drafts, and the lingering presence of generations who survived, adapted, and thrived in this subterranean labyrinth. You step into a low, twisting passage where the walls glisten with moisture, carrying the faint scent of earth and lingering smoke. Evidence indicates that early humans selected such corridors to regulate movement between chambers, providing both protection and controlled access to sleeping areas, hearths, and storage zones. Observations show subtle depressions and grooves along the floor, likely formed by repeated footsteps over generations, guiding inhabitants safely through the dark labyrinth. You run your hand along the stone, sensing the continuity of human presence and the careful attention required to navigate this space. Small hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions in the chamber floor. Research suggests that these fires were maintained for warmth, light, and communal interaction. Patterns indicate that hearth placement balanced heat distribution, ventilation, and illumination of key areas. You imagine families huddled around the flames, whispering quietly, tending meals, and exchanging knowledge, their movements deliberate and synchronized to preserve warmth and safety in the confined environment. Along the walls, shallow carvings form intersecting lines, circular shapes, and abstract motifs. Certain studies reveal that these markings may have functioned as navigational guides, mnemonic devices, or symbolic records of events and resources. Observations hint at multifunctional use, combining practical guidance with cultural or ritual significance. You trace one line with your fingertips, sensing the human intent and continuity preserved in the stone. A quiet dialogue across generations. Pools of water rest in recessed corners, fed by slow drips from above. Archaeological records demonstrate that access to these natural reservoirs was essential for drinking, food preparation, and maintaining living areas. Analyses imply that sleeping areas, hearths, and work spaces were positioned with careful attention to these water sources, balancing accessibility with dryness and warmth. You lean closer to the pools, noting the subtle ripples and imagining how early humans interpreted these cues to guide their daily routines and survival strategies. Fragments of animal bones, some charred and others intact, lie scattered across alcoves. Observations show that these remains likely represent meals, yet the deliberate arrangement of some clusters hints at ritual or social practices. Some researchers propose that intentional placement reflected communal organization, resource management, or symbolic expression. You crouch to examine a fragment, imagining the care taken to prepare, store, and consume resources within this subterranean environment. Shallow niches along the walls rise slightly from the floor, likely used for storing tools, food, or personal items. Evidence indicates that vertical organization maximized limited space while maintaining order. Notably, the consistency of niche placement across multiple sites suggests shared knowledge or cultural conventions. You run your fingers across one niche, picturing the daily routines and attention to detail required to sustain life underground. A narrow tunnel branches off from the main chamber, its low ceiling and slick walls demanding cautious movement. Investigations hint that such side passages served multiple purposes: observation, storage, or emergency escape. Patterns suggest that repeated use gradually smoothed walls and created shallow steps. Blending natural formation with human adaptation, you step carefully, attuned to subtle drafts, faint echoes, and the centuries of activity embedded in stone. Depressions in the floor form irregular clusters, likely indicating sleeping or work areas. Research suggests that spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social organization. Observations reveal that arrangement also reinforced cooperative roles. Familial proximity, or hierarchical structures, subtly guiding behavior within the confined chamber. You step lightly, aware that each feature reflects deliberate planning and adaptation. You enter a wider chamber where multiple alcoves, hearth remnants, and faint carvings converge. Archaeological records demonstrate that these spaces functioned as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns suggest both careful planning and gradual evolution, shaped by repeated use over generations. You pause to absorb the quiet resonance of the space, aware that every stone, groove, and niche carries the ingenuity and resilience of humans who inhabited this labyrinth thousands of years ago. At the far end, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Analyses indicate that these branches likely served as observation points, storage zones, or emergency exits. Observations reveal a sophisticated understanding of environmental factors, social coordination, and spatial organization. You move carefully, attuned to faint echoes, subtle airflow, and the lingering presence of generations who thrived in this complex subterranean network. You step into a low chamber where the walls curve inward, damp with moisture and cold to the touch. Observations suggest that early humans selected these spaces to protect themselves from harsh surface conditions, while maintaining close access to hearths, water, and sleeping areas. Evidence indicates that subtle grooves along the floor and walls guided movement, helping inhabitants navigate safely through the darkness. You run your hand across the stone, sensing centuries of repeated footsteps, careful placement of tools, and deliberate shaping of the environment. Small hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions, their charred edges hinting at fires maintained over long periods. Research suggests that these hearths provided warmth, light, and a central point for social activity. Patterns indicate that fire placement was carefully considered to balance heat distribution, ventilation, and illumination. You imagine families clustered around the flames, quietly exchanging knowledge, preparing meals, and maintaining vigilance in the confined space. Observations hint that these activities created a rhythm of daily life, a subtle choreography ensuring survival. Along the walls, shallow scratches and faint carvings form intersecting lines and circular motifs. Certain studies reveal that these marks may have served as navigational aids, mnemonic devices, or symbolic expressions of cultural knowledge. Patterns suggest a dual function, combining practical guidance with ritual or communal significance. You trace a line with your fingertips, connecting with a deliberate intent and continuity preserved in the stone by those who lived here long ago. Small pools of water glimmer in recessed corners, fed by slow drips from the ceiling above. Archaeological records demonstrate that access to water was essential for drinking, food preparation, and maintaining the chamber's microclimate. Observations point to careful placement of sleeping areas and hearths relative to these water sources, balancing accessibility with protection from dampness and cold. You lean closer, noticing subtle ripples and sediment patterns, imagining how early humans interpreted these cues to manage their daily lives. Fragments of animal bones lie scattered in shallow depressions, some charred, others intact. Investigations reveal that these remains were likely meals, yet deliberate arrangements hint at ritual or social practices. Certain studies suggest that careful placement may have reinforced social hierarchy, resource management, or symbolic behavior. You crouch to examine one fragment, picturing the careful attention required to consume and store resources while maintaining group cohesion in an underground environment. Along one wall, shallow niches rise slightly from the floor, likely used to hold tools, gathered food, or personal items. Observations indicate that vertical organization maximized the limited space while maintaining order. Notably, the repeated use and refinement of these niches across sites suggest shared cultural practices or convergent strategies for organization. You run your fingers along the smooth surface, imagining the daily routines that maintained efficiency and survival in the underground world. A narrow tunnel branches off the chamber, the low ceiling forcing careful movement. Analyses indicate that these passages may have functioned as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Patterns suggest that repeated use gradually smoothed surfaces and created shallow steps, blending natural formations with human adaptation. Observations hint that early humans integrated environmental awareness with practical design to create a safe and navigable network. Depressions along the floor form clusters, likely indicating sleeping or activity areas. Research suggests that careful spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social organization. Observations reveal that placement may have reinforced cooperative roles, family structures, or hierarchical arrangements, subtly guiding behavior. You step lightly, aware that the design reflects thoughtful adaptation to a demanding subterranean environment. You enter a larger chamber where alcoves, hearth traces, and faint carvings converge. Evidence indicates that these spaces served as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns suggest a combination of deliberate planning and gradual adaptation over generations. You pause to take in the quiet resonance, aware that every stone, groove, and niche carries the ingenuity, vigilance, and survival of humans who inhabited this underground labyrinth thousands of years ago. At the far end, narrow tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, concealed by natural rock formations. Certain studies reveal these branches likely served as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Observations point to a sophisticated understanding of environmental factors, social coordination, and spatial planning. You move carefully, attuned to faint echoes, subtle drafts, and the lingering presence of generations who navigated this subterranean network with skill and attention, you step into a narrow corridor where the walls are slick with moisture and the air carries a cold, mineral scent. Evidence indicates that early humans selected these spaces for protection from surface conditions, while maintaining strategic access to hearths, sleeping areas, and storage zones. Observations show subtle grooves along the floor and walls, likely formed by repeated passage over generations, guiding individuals safely through darkness. You run your hand across the stone, sensing the cumulative presence and careful attention of those who traversed this labyrinth long before you. Small hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions along the floor, their charred surfaces hinting at extended fire use. Research suggests that these hearths provided warmth, light, and a focal point for social and communal activity. Patterns indicate that their placement was deliberate, balancing heat distribution, ventilation, and illumination across the chamber. You imagine families gathered around the flames, whispering quietly, preparing meals, and exchanging knowledge, each movement deliberate to conserve energy and maintain safety in a confined space. Along the walls, faint scratches and carvings form intersecting lines, circular motifs, and irregular patterns. Certain studies reveal that these marks may have served as navigational guides, mnemonic tools, or symbolic expressions of social or ritual significance. Observations hint that the markings were multifunctional, encoding information about resources, safe routes, or communal memory. You trace a line with your fingertips, sensing the deliberate attention behind each mark and the quiet communication it preserved across generations. Small pools of water glimmer in recessed corners, fed by slow drips from the ceiling. Archaeological records demonstrate that access to water was critical for drinking, cooking, and maintaining living areas. Observations suggest that sleeping and work areas were arranged with consideration of these water sources, balancing convenience with protection from dampness and cold. You lean closer to examine the surface, noticing subtle ripples and sediment, imagining how early humans interpreted these natural features to guide daily routines. Fragments of animal bones, some charred and others intact, lie scattered in shallow depressions and alcoves. Investigations reveal that these remains were likely meals, yet the deliberate arrangement of some clusters hints at ritual or social practices. Certain studies propose that these placements reflected resource management, social hierarchy, or symbolic behavior. You crouch to examine a fragment, picturing the care involved in both preparation and storage, a testament to the ingenuity and foresight required to survive in an underground environment. Shallow niches rise slightly from the floor along the walls, likely used to hold tools, gathered food, or personal items. Observations show that vertical organization maximized the limited space while maintaining order. Notably, repeated use and refinement across multiple sites suggest shared knowledge or convergent strategies for efficient organization. You run your fingers across one niche, imagining the daily routines that sustained life and facilitated survival in these subterranean spaces. A narrow tunnel branches from the chamber, its low ceiling forcing deliberate, careful movement. Analyses indicate that these passages functioned as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Patterns suggest that repeated human activity gradually modified the natural rock, smoothing surfaces and creating shallow steps. Observations hint that early humans combined natural formations with deliberate adaptations, integrating environmental awareness with practical design to create navigable, safe corridors. Depressions in the floor form irregular clusters, likely used for sleeping or work areas. Research indicates that spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social order. Observation suggests that arrangement may have reinforced cooperative roles, familial proximity, or hierarchical structures, subtly guiding behavior within the chamber. You step lightly, aware that each feature reflects intentional planning and adaptability to environmental and social demands. You enter a wider chamber where multiple alcoves, hearth traces, and faint carvings converge. Evidence indicates that these chambers served as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns suggest both careful planning and gradual evolution shaped by repeated use over generations. You pause, absorbing the quiet resonance of the space, aware that every stone, groove, and depression carries the ingenuity, vigilance, and resilience of humans who inhabited this underground labyrinth thousands of years ago. At the far end, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Certain studies reveal that these branches likely served as observation points, storage areas, or emergency escape routes. Observations point to a sophisticated understanding of environmental factors, social coordination, and spatial planning. You move carefully, attuned to echoes, subtle drafts, and the lingering presence of generations who navigated this subterranean network with skill, awareness, and resilience. You enter a low, twisting passage where the walls are damp and cold, carrying the faint scent of mineral-rich water. Evidence indicates that early humans selected these confined spaces for protection, balancing concealment from predators with access to hearths, water, and storage areas. Observations show subtle grooves along the floor and walls, likely formed by repeated footsteps over generations, guiding safe movement in the darkness. You run your hand along the stone, sensing the continuity of human presence and the careful attention required to navigate this labyrinth. Small hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions along the chamber floor. Research suggests that these fires provided warmth, light, and a gathering point for communal activities. Patterns imply that their placement was deliberate, balancing heat distribution, ventilation, and illumination to support multiple functions. You imagine families clustered around the flames, whispering softly, preparing meals, and exchanging knowledge, each action measured to conserve energy and maintain safety. Observations hint that the rhythm of daily activity revolved around these subtle focal points. Along the walls, faint scratches and carvings form intersecting lines, circular motifs, and abstract shapes. Certain studies reveal that these markings may have served as navigation guides, mnemonic devices, or symbolic records of events, resources, or social structures. Investigations show that their use was likely multifunctional, blending practical guidance with cultural or ritual significance. You trace one shallow groove with your fingertips, sensing the deliberate care and continuity preserved by generations of inhabitants. Small pools of water glimmer in recessed corners, fed by slow drips from the ceiling. Archaeological records demonstrate that access to these natural reservoirs was essential for survival, supporting drinking, food preparation, and maintaining the chamber's microclimate. Analyses imply that sleeping areas, hearths, and work zones were arranged with careful attention to these water sources, balancing accessibility with dryness and warmth. You lean closer, noticing subtle ripples and sediment, imagining how early humans interpreted and adapted to these microenvironments to sustain life. Fragments of animal bones, some charred and others intact, lie scattered across shallow depressions. Observations point to their use as meals, while certain clusters suggest intentional arrangement, perhaps linked to ritual practices or social organization. Some researchers propose that careful placement reinforced group cohesion, resource management, or symbolic behavior. You crouch to examine one fragment, imagining the deliberate care required to consume, store, and utilize resources within the subterranean environment, shallow niches rise slightly from the floor along the walls, likely serving as storage for tools, gathered food, or personal items. Evidence indicates that vertical organization allowed for efficient use of limited space while maintaining accessibility. Notably, repeated refinement of these niches across multiple sites suggests shared cultural practices or convergent adaptive strategies. You run your fingers across the smooth surface, picturing the daily routines and attention required to sustain life underground. A narrow tunnel branches off the chamber, its low ceiling forcing cautious movement. Analyses indicate that these passages served observation purposes, storage, or emergency escape routes. Observations show that repeated use gradually smoothed walls and created shallow steps. Blending natural formations with deliberate human adaptation, you step carefully, attuned to faint echoes, subtle airflow, and centuries of activity embedded in the stone. Depressions in the floor form clusters, likely indicating sleeping or work areas. Research suggests that the spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social organization. Observations reveal that arrangement may have reinforced cooperative roles, family proximity, or hierarchy, subtly guiding daily behavior. You step lightly, aware that each feature reflects careful planning and adaptability to the environmental and social conditions of underground life. You enter a wider chamber where multiple alcoves, hearth traces, and faint carvings converge. Archaeological records demonstrate that these spaces functioned as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns suggest both deliberate planning and gradual adaptation over generations. You pause to absorb the quiet resonance of the chamber, aware that every stone, groove, and niche carries the ingenuity, vigilance, and resilience of humans who navigated this subterranean labyrinth thousands of years ago. At the far end, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, concealed by natural rock formations. Certain studies reveal that these branches served as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Investigations show a sophisticated understanding of environmental conditions, social coordination, and spatial planning. You move carefully, attuned to echoes, drafts, and the lingering presence of generations who survived, adapted, and thrived in this underground network. You step into a narrow, twisting passage, the walls slick with moisture and the air carrying a faint mineral scent. Evidence indicates that early humans selected these corridors to provide safe access between chambers while maintaining control over movement within the underground network. Observations show subtle grooves along the floor and walls, likely formed by repeated footsteps over generations, guiding inhabitants through near-total darkness. You run your hand along the stone, feeling the traces of countless journeys and the care that each step required to avoid missteps in this confined space. Small hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions along the floor. Research suggests that these fires provided warmth, light, and social focus, creating a central point for communal life. Patterns imply careful placement, balancing heat distribution, ventilation, and illumination to maximize utility. You imagine families clustered around the flames, whispering quietly, preparing food, and passing knowledge. Each action deliberate and synchronized to ensure survival. Observations hint that the rhythm of life in these chambers was intimately tied to the fire's subtle glow. Faint carvings along the walls form intersecting lines, circular patterns, and abstract symbols. Certain studies reveal that these may have functioned as navigational aids, mnemonic devices, or symbolic records. Investigations show that some markings encoded information about safe routes, resource locations, or social arrangements. You trace one shallow groove with your fingertips, sensing the careful thought behind each mark, and the quiet communication that connected generations of underground inhabitants. Small pools of water rest in recessed alcoves, fed by slow drips from the ceiling above. Archaeological records demonstrate that access to water was critical for survival, supporting drinking, food preparation, and maintenance of living spaces. Observations suggest that sleeping areas, hearths, and work zones were arranged with consideration of these natural reservoirs, balancing accessibility with dryness and warmth. You lean closer, noticing subtle ripples and sediment, imagining how early humans interpreted and adapted to these environmental cues. Fragments of animal bones, some charred, others intact, lie scattered in shallow depressions. Analyses indicate these remains were likely meals, while certain clusters hint at deliberate placement, possibly for ritual or symbolic purposes. Some researchers propose that careful arrangement reinforced group cohesion, social hierarchy, or resource management. You crouch to examine a fragment, picturing the careful planning required to prepare, store, and use resources within the constraints of the subterranean environment. Shallow niches along the walls rise slightly from the floor, likely used to store tools, food, or personal items. Evidence suggests that vertical organization maximized space while maintaining accessibility. Notably, repeated use and refinement across sites imply shared cultural practices or convergent strategies for efficient resource management. You run your fingers along a smooth niche, imagining the daily routines that relied on meticulous organization and careful attention. A narrow side tunnel branches from the chamber, its low ceiling requiring cautious movement. Observations show that such passages were used for observation, storage, or emergency escape routes. Analyses indicate that repeated use gradually modified natural rock, smoothing surfaces and forming shallow steps. Patterns suggest that early humans integrated natural formations with deliberate adaptation, creating functional and safe pathways throughout the labyrinth. Floor depressions form clusters, likely indicating sleeping or activity areas. Research suggests that the arrangement allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social order. Observations hint that spacing reinforced cooperative roles, family proximity, or hierarchical structures, subtly guiding behavior within the chamber. You step lightly, aware that each feature reflects thoughtful adaptation to environmental and social needs. You enter a wider chamber where alcoves, hearth traces, and faint carvings converge. Archaeological records demonstrate that these spaces functioned as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns suggest a combination of careful planning and gradual evolution through repeated use. You pause, absorbing the quiet resonance of the space, aware that every stone, groove, and niche carries the ingenuity, vigilance, and survival strategies of humans who inhabited this underground labyrinth. At the far end, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Certain studies reveal that these extensions served as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Investigations show that early humans demonstrated sophisticated understanding of environmental conditions, social coordination, and spatial organization. You move carefully, attuned to echoes, drafts, and the enduring presence of generations who navigated this subterranean network with skill, awareness, and resilience. You step into a narrow chamber where the ceiling dips low, the walls slick with moisture, and the air carries a faint, earthy scent. Evidence indicates that early humans selected such spaces to create defensible living areas while maintaining proximity to essential resources like water, hearths, and storage zones. Observations show subtle depressions along the floor and faint grooves on the walls, likely formed by generations of repeated passage. You run your hand along the stone, sensing the layered presence of human activity and the careful attention that each step required in this confined environment. Small hearth remnants occupy depressions along the floor, their charred surfaces a reminder of sustained fire use. Research suggests that these hearths provided warmth, light, and social focus, serving as central points for family and group interaction. Patterns indicate that their placement was deliberate, balancing heat, airflow, and illumination to support multiple functions within the chamber. You imagine people clustered around the flames, whispering quietly, tending meals, and exchanging knowledge, each movement measured to maintain safety and conserve energy. Observations hint that the rhythm of daily life revolved around these hearths, providing both physical and social sustenance. Faint carvings along the walls form linear and circular motifs, some overlapping or intersecting. Certain studies reveal that these markings may have served practical purposes, such as guiding movement or recording locations of resources. Analyses suggest they may also have held symbolic meaning, preserving memory, social hierarchy, or ritual knowledge. You trace one groove with your fingertips, feeling the quiet intent behind each mark and imagining the generations that carefully inscribed them into stone. Pools of water glimmer in recessed corners, fed by slow drips from above. Archaeological records demonstrate that access to water was critical, supporting drinking, cooking, and maintaining environmental balance within the chamber. Observations indicate that sleeping areas, hearths, and work zones were arranged in relation to these water sources, optimizing both convenience and safety. You lean closer, noting tiny ripples and faint sediment layers, imagining how early humans interpreted and adapted to these natural features to sustain life underground. Fragments of animal bones, some charred, others intact, lie scattered across shallow depressions. Investigations reveal that these remains were likely meals, though their arrangement suggests intentional placement, possibly tied to ritual or symbolic behavior. Some researchers propose that deliberate positioning reinforced social cohesion, hierarchical structure, or careful resource management. You crouch to examine a fragment, picturing the careful preparation, consumption, and storage of food that required attention and coordination within the subterranean environment. Shallow niches rise slightly from the floor along the walls, likely used to store tools, food, or personal belongings. Observations indicate that vertical organization maximized limited space while maintaining accessibility. Notably, repeated refinement across sites suggests shared cultural practices or convergent strategies for efficient resource management. You run your fingers along a smooth niche, imagining the meticulous routines that relied on organized spaces to maintain daily life. A narrow tunnel branches off the chamber, the low ceiling forcing careful movement. Analyses indicate that these passages functioned as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Patterns suggest that repeated use gradually smoothed walls and formed shallow steps, blending natural formation with human adaptation. You step slowly, attuned to subtle echoes, drafts, and the centuries of human activity preserved in the stone. Depressions along the floor form clusters, likely indicating sleeping or work areas. Research suggests that careful spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social organization. Observations hint that these layouts reinforced cooperative roles, family proximity, or hierarchical structures, subtly guiding daily routines and behavior. You step lightly, aware that each feature reflects intentional adaptation to environmental and social demands. You enter a wider chamber where multiple alcove, hearth traces, and faint carvings converge. Archaeological records demonstrate that these spaces served as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns suggest a combination of deliberate planning and gradual adaptation shaped by repeated use over generations. You pause, absorbing the quiet resonance of the chamber, aware that every stone, groove, and niche carries the ingenuity, resilience, and vigilance of humans who inhabited this underground labyrinth. At the far end, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Certain studies reveal these branches likely served as observation points, storage areas, or emergency escape routes. Observations show a sophisticated understanding of environmental conditions, social coordination, and spatial organization. You move carefully, attuned to echoes, drafts, and the lingering presence of generations who survived, adapted, and thrived in this subterranean network. You step into a twisting passage, the stone walls slick with moisture and cold to the touch, carrying a faint, earthy scent. Evidence indicates that early humans selected these corridors to regulate movement, connecting key chambers while maintaining control over access points. Observations point to subtle depressions and grooves along the floor, formed by repeated passage over generations, which guided individuals safely through near-total darkness. You run your hand along the stone, sensing the quiet persistence of human activity embedded in every contour. Small hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions along the floor, their charred surfaces a testament to sustained fire use. Research suggests that these fires provided warmth, light, and a focal point for communal activity. Analyses imply that the careful placement of hearths balanced illumination, heat distribution, and ventilation, supporting multiple functions in the chamber. You imagine families gathered around the flames, whispering, tending meals, and exchanging knowledge while maintaining a rhythm that ensured survival and social cohesion. Faint carvings and scratches line the walls, forming intersecting lines, circular motifs, and abstract shapes. Certain studies reveal that these markings may have served practical purposes, such as guiding movement or indicating resource locations. Investigations show they may also have held symbolic meaning, preserving memory, social structure, or ritual knowledge. You trace one groove with your fingertips, sensing the deliberate intent behind each mark and the quiet communication it represents across generations. Pools of water glimmer in recessed corners, fed by slow drips from the ceiling. Archaeological records demonstrate that access to water was essential for survival, supporting drinking, food preparation, and environmental balance. Observations point to careful spatial organization, with sleeping areas, hearths, and work zones arranged in relation to water sources, balancing accessibility with dryness and warmth. You lean closer, noting subtle ripples and sediment, imagining how early humans interpreted these features to sustain daily life. Fragments of animal bones lie scattered across shallow depressions, some charred, others intact. Investigations hint that these remains were likely meals, while certain arrangements suggest intentional placement, perhaps for ritual, symbolic, or organizational purposes. Some researchers propose that careful arrangement reinforced social cohesion, hierarchy, or resource management. You crouch to examine a fragment, picturing the deliberation required to prepare, store, and utilize resources efficiently in a challenging subterranean environment. Shallow niches rise slightly from the walls, likely used to hold tools, food, or personal belongings. Observations show that vertical organization maximized space while keeping essential items accessible. Notably, repeated refinement of these niches across multiple sites suggests shared cultural practices or convergent strategies for maintaining order. You run your fingers along one smooth surface, Imagining the daily routines that depended on organisation and careful attention, a narrow tunnel branches off the chamber, its low ceiling requiring careful navigation. Reconstructions suggest that such passages functioned as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Patterns imply that repeated human use gradually shaped the natural rock, smoothing surfaces and forming shallow steps. Observations indicate that early humans integrated environmental awareness with practical adaptation, creating functional and safe pathways. Depressions in the floor form clusters, likely indicating sleeping or work areas. Fossil evidence implies that spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social organization. Analyses suggest that arrangement may have reinforced cooperative roles, familial proximity, or hierarchy, subtly guiding behavior within the chamber. You step lightly, aware that each feature reflects intentional adaptation to environmental and social conditions. You enter a wider chamber where alcoves, hearth traces, and faint carvings converge. Archaeological records demonstrate that these spaces served as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns indicate both deliberate planning and gradual evolution shaped by repeated use over generations. You pause, absorbing the quiet resonance of the chamber, aware that every stone, groove, and niche carries the ingenuity, vigilance, and resilience of humans who navigated this subterranean labyrinth thousands of years ago. At the far end, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Environmental traces suggest these branches were likely used for observation, storage, or emergency escape. Observations point to sophisticated understanding of environmental conditions, social coordination, and spatial organization. You move carefully, attuned to echoes, drafts, and the enduring presence of generations who adapted and thrived in this underground network. You step into a narrow chamber where the ceiling dips low, and the walls glisten with moisture, carrying a faint, earthy scent of stone and mineral-rich water. Evidence indicates that early humans selected these confined spaces for protection while maintaining access to hearths, water, and storage areas. Observations point to subtle grooves along the floor and walls, likely formed by repeated passage over centuries, guiding movement safely in near-complete darkness. You run your hand along the stone, feeling the presence of generations who navigated this underground labyrinth with careful attention. Small hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions along the floor. Research suggests that these fires provided warmth, light, and a central point for social interaction. Patterns indicate deliberate placement, balancing heat, airflow, and illumination to optimize both comfort and safety. You imagine families huddled around the flames, whispering softly, preparing meals, and exchanging knowledge while maintaining vigilance. Observations hint that daily rhythms revolved around these subtle focal points, shaping the flow of life underground. Along the walls, faint carvings form linear and circular motifs, some intersecting while others run parallel. Certain studies reveal that these markings may have served as navigational aids, mnemonic tools, or symbolic records of events, resources, or social structures. Investigations show that they likely had multiple functions, blending practical guidance with cultural or ritual significance. You trace one shallow groove with your fingertips, sensing the human intent preserved across generations and the quiet communication encoded in stone. Pools of water glimmer in recessed alcoves, fed by slow drips from above. Archaeological records demonstrate that access to water was vital for drinking, cooking, and sustaining the chamber's microclimate. Observations indicate that sleeping areas, hearths, and work zones were arranged in relation to these water sources, balancing accessibility with dryness and warmth. You lean closer to examine the rippling surface, imagining how early humans monitored and interpreted these subtle environmental cues to plan their daily lives. Fragments of animal bones lie scattered in depressions and alcoves, some charred, others intact. Analyses indicate these remains were likely meals, while certain clusters suggest deliberate placement for ritual, symbolic, or organizational purposes. Some researchers propose that careful arrangement reinforced social cohesion, hierarchy, or resource management. You crouch to examine a fragment, picturing the attention and coordination required to consume, store, and manage essential resources underground. Shallow niches rise along the walls, likely used to store tools, gathered food, or personal belongings. Observations show that vertical organization maximized space while maintaining accessibility. Notably, repeated refinement of these niches across multiple sites implies shared cultural practices or convergent strategies for organizing living spaces. You run your fingers across a smooth surface, imagining the meticulous routines that sustained life and efficiency within these subterranean chambers. A narrow tunnel branches off the chamber, its low ceiling requiring cautious movement. Reconstruction suggests that these passages functioned as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Patterns indicate that repeated human activity gradually smoothed the natural rock, creating shallow steps and navigable surfaces. Investigations show that early humans integrated environmental awareness with practical adaptation, producing safe, functional pathways throughout the labyrinth. Depressions along the floor form clusters, likely indicating sleeping or work areas. Fossil evidence implies that the spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social organization. Observations suggest that arrangement reinforced cooperative roles, familial proximity, or hierarchy, subtly guiding behavior and activity. You step lightly, aware that each feature reflects deliberate adaptation to both social and environmental demands. You enter a wider chamber where alcoves, hearth traces, and faint carvings converge. Archaeological records demonstrate that these spaces functioned as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns indicate both careful planning and gradual evolution through repeated use over generations. You pause, absorbing the quiet resonance of the chamber, aware that every stone, groove, and niche carries the ingenuity, vigilance, and resilience of humans who inhabited this underground labyrinth. At the far end, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Certain studies reveal these branches likely served as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Observations show a sophisticated understanding of environmental conditions, social coordination, and spatial organization. You move carefully, attuned to echoes, drafts, and the enduring presence of generations who thrived in this subterranean network. You step into a narrow, twisting passage, the walls damp and cool, carrying a faint scent of mineral-rich water and earth. Evidence indicates that early humans selected this chamber to provide protection while maintaining access to hearths, water, and storage areas. Observations show subtle depressions along the floor and shallow grooves on the walls, formed by repeated footsteps over centuries, guiding movement safely through near-total darkness. You run your hand along the stone, feeling the layered presence of countless generations who navigated these underground spaces with care and attention. Small hearth remnants occupy shallow depressions along the floor. Research suggests that these fires provided warmth, light, and a central focus for communal activity. Patterns indicate deliberate placement, balancing heat, airflow, and illumination to support multiple functions within the chamber. You imagine families gathered around the flames, whispering quietly, tending meals, and exchanging knowledge while maintaining vigilance in the confined space. Observations point to a rhythm of life intimately tied to the fire's subtle glow, shaping daily routines and social cohesion. Along the walls, faint carvings and scratches form linear, circular, and abstract motifs. Certain studies reveal that these marks may have served as navigational aids, mnemonic devices, or symbolic records. Investigations show that some carvings conveyed information about resource locations, safe passages, or social structure. You trace one groove with your fingertips, sensing the careful thought embedded in the stone and the quiet communication left by those who lived here long ago. Pools of water glimmer in recessed alcoves, fed by slow drips from the ceiling above. Archaeological records demonstrate that access to water was critical for drinking, food preparation, and maintaining environmental balance. Observations indicate that sleeping areas, hearths, and work zones were arranged with consideration of these water sources, balancing accessibility with protection from dampness and cold. You lean closer, observing subtle ripples and sediment, imagining how early humans interpreted and adapted to these features to sustain life. Fragments of animal bones, some charred and others intact, lie scattered in depressions and alcoves. Analyses indicate these remains were likely meals, yet deliberate arrangements suggest ritual, symbolic, or organizational intent. Some researchers propose that careful placement reinforced social cohesion, hierarchy, or resource management. You crouch to examine a fragment, picturing the attention and coordination required to prepare, consume, and store essential resources within a subterranean environment. Shallow niches rise along the walls, likely used for storing tools, food, or personal items. Observations show that vertical organization maximized limited space while maintaining accessibility. Notably, repeated refinement of these niches across multiple sites indicates shared cultural practices or convergent strategies for efficient organization. You run your fingers along one smooth surface, imagining the careful routines that supported survival and daily life underground. A narrow tunnel branches off the chamber, the low ceiling requiring careful movement. Reconstructions suggest these passages functioned as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Patterns indicate that repeated human activity gradually smoothed walls and created shallow steps, blending natural formation with deliberate adaptation. Observations show that early humans integrated environmental awareness with practical design to create navigable and safe pathways throughout the labyrinth. Depressions along the floor form clusters, likely indicating sleeping or work areas. Fossil evidence implies that the spacing allowed multiple individuals to coexist efficiently while maintaining social organization. Observations suggest that these layouts reinforced cooperative roles, familial proximity, or hierarchical structures, subtly guiding daily behavior. You step lightly, aware that each feature reflects intentional adaptation to both social and environmental demands. You enter a wider chamber where alcoves, hearth traces, and faint carvings converge. Archaeological records demonstrate that these spaces functioned as central hubs, integrating living, storage, and work areas. Patterns suggest a combination of deliberate planning and gradual adaptation through repeated use over generations. You pause, absorbing the quiet resonance of the chamber, aware that every stone, groove, and niche carries the ingenuity, vigilance, and resilience of humans who inhabited this subterranean labyrinth. At the far end, small tunnels branch into shadowed recesses, subtly concealed by natural rock formations. Certain studies reveal these branches served as observation points, storage areas, or emergency exits. Observations show a sophisticated understanding of environmental conditions, social coordination, and spatial organization. You move carefully, attuned to echoes, drafts, and the lingering presence of generations who adapted and thrived in this underground network. The torchlight flickers softly, casting long, gentle shadows across the damp stone walls. You feel the cool underground air brushing against your skin, carrying the faint scent of mineral water and ancient earth. The echoes of distant dripping water fade slowly, leaving only a quiet rhythm that seems to pulse with the history of this hidden world. You settle into the stillness, letting the gentle resonance of stone and shadow soothe your senses. Outside, faint winds stir over forgotten hills, whispering across fog-covered forests, carrying a chill that contrasts with the warmth lingering from the hearths you imagined. You feel the weight of time dissolve as centuries of human presence fade into quiet memory. Small alcoves, narrow tunnels, and deep chambers recede into darkness, their secrets held softly beneath layers of stone, each one a reminder of lives carefully lived, of survival, adaptation, and care. Distant bells seem to toll somewhere far above, their tones slow, deliberate, and comforting. The faint crackle of long-extinguished fires seems to echo faintly in your mind, mingling with the soft dripping of water and the sigh of air moving through hidden passages. You sense the patience and wisdom of those who once moved through these tunnels, their footsteps recorded in the grooves and depressions, now guiding your own breathing and stillness. The mist settles gently across forgotten ruins, softening edges and blending stone with shadow. You feel a cool calm descend through every movement and thought, as if the very walls themselves are breathing with quiet assurance. The underground labyrinth, the flickering light, the distant echoes all fade slowly into a serene silence. Your mind drifts, following the rhythm of ancient presence and enduring quiet, and you feel a gentle surrender to the stillness. The underground world rests, the air cool and calm, the shadows soft and steady. You let the layers of time, stone, and memory dissolve around you, carrying with them the slow, quiet heartbeat of survival and life long past. Sweet dreams.